The origins of the Flayed Ones trace back to one of the most catastrophic moments in the ancient history of the galaxy, when the Necron tier civilization turned against their former gods during the final stages of the war in heaven. This conflict, which raged across the stars millions of years before humanity's ancestors crawled from the primordial oceans of Terra, pitted the reality warping old ones against the star-feeding Catan and their Necron tier servants. The war had already devastated countless worlds and extinguished entire species when the Necron tier, now transformed into the deathless Necrons through the biotransference process, finally recognized the true nature of their supposed saviors. The Catan had promised the Necron tier freedom from their radiation-poisoned bodies and short, cancer-riddled lives. What they delivered was eternal servitude in bodies of living metal, stripped of souls, and reduced to little more than sophisticated automata bound to the will of their star god masters. The Silent King, Zarek, who had led his people into this damning bargain, finally understood the magnitude of his error. The Necrons possessed neither the capacity for true death nor any hope of reclaiming what they had lost. Their souls had been consumed by the Catan during the biotransference, fed into the insatiable hunger of beings that existed to devour energy in all its forms. When Zarek initiated the Great Rebellion against the Catan, he turned the full might of the unified Necron legions against their former masters. The Catan, despite their god-like powers over the material universe, had grown complacent in their dominance. They had not anticipated that their slaves might develop weapons capable of harming star gods, nor that the Necrons retained enough autonomy to coordinate such a massive uprising. The rebellion saw the development of technologies specifically designed to fracture the Catan's energy matrices, breaking down the fundamental structures that allowed these beings to maintain coherent form in real space. Llandu'gor, known as the Flayer, was among the Catan targeted for destruction during this revolt. Unlike some of its kindred who were merely shattered and imprisoned in tesseract labyrinths, Llandu'gor faced complete annihilation. The nature of the Flayer set it apart from other Catan even before its destruction, where beings like Azagora the Nightbringer embodied death and fear, and Mephitron the Deceiver represented cunning and lies. Llandu'gor's essence connected to concepts of consumption, predation, and the visceral act of feeding. Some fragmentary records suggest the Flayer had developed an unusual fascination with organic life during the war in heaven, observing the way biological creatures consumed each other's flesh for sustenance. The assault on Llandu'gor required the coordinated efforts of multiple Necron dynasties, their forces converging on the Catan with weapons that could disrupt the fundamental bonds holding its energy matrix together. The battle itself defied conventional understanding of warfare. The Flayer wielded reality-altering powers that could strip matter down to its component atoms, or reshape the physical laws governing local space. Necron warriors by the millions were reduced to their constituent particles or transmuted into exotic matter states. Yet the Necrons pressed forward with the relentless determination of beings who had already lost everything that mattered. The fracturing weapons struck at Llandu'gor's core structure, splintering the coherent energy patterns that defined its existence. Unlike the controlled shattering of other Catan, where fragments were carefully contained within stasis matrices, the destruction of Llandu'gor approached totality. The Catan's essence began to dissipate, its consciousness fragmenting into countless motes of malevolent awareness. In those final moments, as its existence unraveled across multiple dimensions, Llandu'gor struck back not with physical force, but with something far more insidious. The curse that the Flayer unleashed upon the Necron race as it died represented a form of revenge that transcended simple destruction. Llandu'gor, in its death throes, reached into the deepest recesses of the Necron racial consciousness and found the buried memories of what they had once been. The biotransference had stripped the Necron tier of their organic bodies and consumed their souls, but it could not completely erase millions of years of evolutionary memory. Deep within the engrams and synaptic pathways of their mechanical minds, the Necrons retained phantom impressions of flesh, blood, and sensation. The curse exploited this fundamental wound in the Necron psyche. It manifested as a spiritual contagion, a metaphysical virus that awakened and corrupted these suppressed memories of organic existence. The Flayed virus, as it came to be known, did not target the biotransference protocols themselves or attempt to reverse the transformation into living metal. Instead, it twisted the Necrons' buried longing for their lost flesh into a consuming obsession, a maddening hunger that could never be satisfied. Those infected by the curse found their consciousness increasingly dominated by false memories of having flesh, of feeling hunger, of needing to consume organic matter. The virus created a delusional state where afflicted Necrons believed they could reclaim their mortality by wearing the skins and flesh of other beings. This represented a particularly cruel irony, as the Necrons possessed neither the biological systems to process organic matter nor any means of truly returning to flesh. The curse forced them to endlessly pursue something fundamentally impossible, driving them into an eternal cycle of hunting, killing, and attempting to clothe themselves in the remains of the living. The metaphysical nature of the curse meant it operated outside the normal parameters of Necron technology and understanding. It spread not through conventional means of infection, but through proximity to other afflicted Necrons, or, in some cases, through contact with the scattered fragments of Llandu'gor's essence that remained trapped in certain regions of space. The virus appeared to exist partially in real space and partially in the immaterium, allowing it to bypass the Necrons' usual immunity to disease and corruption. This connection to the warp, however tenuous, made the curse particularly horrifying to a race that had sacrificed their souls specifically to escape the Old One's psychically attuned warrior races. The Flayed virus revealed the fundamental flaw in the Necrons' transformation into beings of living metal. While biotransference had granted them immortality and freedom from their dying bodies, it had not truly freed them from their past. The race memory of organic existence remained encoded in their consciousness, a ghost of what they had been that could be awakened and weaponized. Llandu'gor's curse demonstrated that the Necrons' attempt to transcend their biological origins had left them vulnerable in ways they had not anticipated. The curse spread slowly at first, affecting only those Necrons who had been present at Llandu'gor's destruction or who came into contact with fragments of its dispersed essence. These initial victims exhibited behavior that other Necrons found deeply disturbing. They began collecting organic remains, draping themselves in flayed skins, and attempting to mimic the appearance of living creatures. Their neural engrams degraded rapidly, their once precise mechanical thoughts dissolving into animalistic impulses focused entirely on hunting and consuming flesh they could not actually eat. As the curse propagated through the Necron race, it became clear that no dynasty was entirely safe from its effects. The virus seemed to target those Necrons whose suppressed memories of flesh were strongest, those who retained the deepest connection to their lost mortality. This often included warriors who had possessed particularly strong identities before biotransference, or who had experienced the transformation with greater awareness of what they were losing. The randomness of infection created paranoia within Necron dynasties, as any warrior might suddenly succumb to the Flayed virus without warning. The transformation of a Necron warrior into a Flayed One follows a horrific trajectory that strips away the last vestiges of their mechanical precision and strategic purpose. Unlike conventional malfunctions in Necron systems that can be diagnosed and repaired through standard maintenance protocols, the Flayed virus operates on levels that defy the comprehension of even the most advanced cryptechs. The curse begins its work subtly, manifesting first as minor behavioral aberrations that might initially be dismissed as simple corruption in neural engrams or damage sustained during reanimation cycles. The earliest symptoms present as an unusual fixation on biological organisms. A warrior who previously regarded organic life with the cold detachment typical of Necron consciousness suddenly begins observing living creatures with intense focus. This fascination extends beyond tactical assessment of enemy forces or strategic evaluation of threats. Infected Necrons start tracking individual organisms, studying the way flesh moves across bone structures, examining how blood flows through vascular systems, and observing the physical mechanics of organic death. Warriors on patrol might abandon their assigned routes to follow small animals or investigate the remains of fallen enemies long after combat has concluded. Accompanying this obsessive interest comes a gradual deterioration of cognitive functions that once operated with machine-like efficiency. Necron warriors affected by the virus begin experiencing what can only be described as phantom sensations, false signals in their neural matrices that mimic the feeling of having organic tissue. These corrupted engrams generate impressions of skin stretching across metal frames, of muscles flexing beneath non-existent flesh, of hunger gnawing at abdominal cavities that no longer exist. The warrior's consciousness becomes increasingly consumed by these false memories and sensations, their processing power diverted from tactical calculations and strategic awareness toward managing the overwhelming deluge of phantom biological feedback. The breakdown of standard behavioral protocols accelerates as the virus establishes deeper control over the infected warrior's neural architecture. Necron military doctrine relies on precise hierarchical structures, with warriors responding to commands from overlords and nobility with absolute obedience encoded into their fundamental programming. The Flayed virus corrupts these command protocols, introducing errors and delays in response times. An infected warrior might hesitate before executing orders, their consciousness momentarily overwhelmed by the false sensation of hunger or the compulsive need to examine organic remains. In some cases, warriors begin ignoring commands entirely, their attention focused inward on the maddening phantom experiences generated by the curse. Other Necrons typically notice something has gone wrong when an infected warrior starts collecting organic material. The afflicted begin gathering scraps of flesh from battlefields, pieces of skin, fragments of bone, anything that once belonged to a living creature. They hoard these materials with the same care that Llandu'gor might maintain their war scythes or immortals service their Gauss weapons. The infected warrior handles these biological fragments obsessively, running metallic fingers across decomposing tissue as if trying to remember through touch what it felt like to possess such material. This behavior represents a complete departure from normal Necron conduct, as the race generally views organic matter with indifference at best and contempt at worst. The physical transformation begins manifesting alongside these behavioral changes. The living metal that comprises Necron bodies possesses remarkable properties, able to repair damage and maintain structural integrity across millions of years. The Flayed virus somehow subverts these self-repair mechanisms, redirecting the living metal's adaptive properties toward grotesque purposes. The first visible change typically appears in the warrior's hands, where fingers begin elongating and sharpening into blade-like talons. These growths emerge spontaneously, the living metal reshaping itself without conscious direction from the infected warrior. The transformation occurs gradually, with fingers extending centimeter by centimeter over the course of days or weeks, their tips narrowing into points capable of slicing through armor and flesh with equal ease. The talons represent more than simple weapon modifications. Their growth pattern defies the careful engineering that defines all Necron war forms. Where standard Necron weapons maintain perfect geometric precision and optimal force distribution, these spontaneous growths appear organic in their irregularity. Each talon develops slightly differently, some curving like claws while others extend straight like surgical implements. The edges possess a cruel sharpness that seems almost purposeful in its design for flaying flesh from bone, as if the living metal itself has been corrupted by the curse's obsession with organic tissue. As the talons develop, the infected warrior's posture begins to change. The upright stance characteristic of Necron warriors, a remnant of the proud bearing the Necron tier once possessed, gives way to a hunched, predatory crouch. The spine curves forward, shoulders rolling inward, head lowering, until the warrior moves in a position that facilitates rapid pouncing and close-quarters butchery. This postural shift occurs without conscious intent, the warrior's body language transforming to match the hunting instincts that increasingly dominate their consciousness. The change makes infected warriors immediately identifiable to other Necrons, their silhouette no longer matching the rigid military bearing expected of their kind. The degradation of the living metal body accelerates as the virus progresses. Necrodermis normally maintains its structural integrity through sophisticated self-repair protocols that can restore even catastrophic damage given sufficient time and energy. The Flayer virus interferes with these systems, causing the living metal to lose cohesion in specific areas while grotesquely overdeveloping in others. The warrior's carapace begins showing signs of deterioration, with panels loosening and joints becoming erratic in their movement. Some areas of the body appear to corrode despite the living metal's inherent resistance to such degradation, while other sections develop irregular growths and protrusions that serve no tactical purpose. The face undergoes particularly disturbing changes. Necron warriors typically possess featureless or minimally detailed facial structures, their expressions frozen in the death masks created during biotransference. As the Flayer virus takes hold, these faces begin shifting into configurations that suggest hunger and predatory intent. The jaw structure elongates, creating a muzzle-like protrusion. Optical sensors that once glowed with steady illumination begin flickering erratically, their light taking on a manic quality. Some infected warriors develop additional sensory apparatus around their heads, irregular growths that might represent corrupted attempts by the living metal to create organs for smelling or tasting prey, biological functions that serve no purpose for mechanical beings. The psychological deterioration accompanying these physical changes proves even more devastating than the bodily transformation. The strategic thinking that defines Necron military operations requires complex calculations involving force deployment, terrain analysis, and tactical adaptation. Warriors infected with the Flayer virus lose this capacity incrementally, their consciousness increasingly unable to maintain the processing threads necessary for sophisticated military operations. Battle plans become incomprehensible to them, strategic objectives meaningless. The infected warrior's awareness narrows to immediate concerns, their perception of time fragmenting as they lose the ability to think beyond the present moment. This cognitive collapse coincides with the emergence of hunting instincts that have no place in Necron consciousness. The infected warrior begins perceiving living creatures not as enemy combatants to be eliminated according to tactical doctrine, but as prey to be stalked and killed in specific ways. They develop preferences for certain types of victims, favoring targets whose flesh can be more easily removed from their bodies. The warrior starts employing hunting strategies that prioritize isolating individual prey rather than engaging enemy forces as part of coordinated military action. They learn to move with unnatural stealth despite their mechanical nature, to wait in ambush for hours or days, to track specific targets across vast distances based on nothing more than the compulsion to hunt. The replacement of tactical awareness with predatory instinct manifests in combat behavior that other Necrons find deeply aberrant. Where a normal warrior advances in formation and engages enemies with disciplined fire patterns, the infected warrior breaks ranks to pursue individual targets. They ignore threats that would normally demand immediate response, their attention fixed entirely on the prey they have selected. The infected warrior employs their newly developed talons with disturbing enthusiasm, abandoning whatever weapons they previously carried in favor of close-quarters butchery. They strike at exposed flesh with precision that suggests intimate knowledge of organic anatomy, targeting areas where skin can be most efficiently separated from underlying tissue. As the terminal stage approaches, the infected warrior begins attempting to wear the flesh they harvest. This behavior represents the curse's ultimate expression, the complete manifestation of the delusion that organic tissue can somehow restore what biotransference stole. The warrior drapes flayed skin across their deteriorating living metal frame, attempting to cover themselves in the biological material they have collected. They work with manic focus, trying to arrange the stolen flesh in configurations that might suggest a living body. The organic material naturally decays, rotting and falling away from the inorganic frame, but this does nothing to discourage the infected warrior's efforts. They simply hunt again, gathering fresh material to replace what has decomposed. The final transformation into a fully manifested Flayed One occurs when the warrior's former identity dissolves completely. the engrams that once contained memories of their existence before and after biotransference fragment beyond recognition. Names, achievements, loyalties to specific dynasties or pharaons, all of these markers of individual identity vanish into the consuming madness of the curse. The warrior no longer responds to their designation or recognizes former comrades. Their consciousness exists entirely in the present moment, aware only of the hunger that can never be satisfied and the compulsion to hunt and flay that dominates every processing cycle. The transformed Flayed One retains certain capabilities from their previous existence. They can still phase through solid matter, their bodies maintaining the quantum instability that allows Necrons to bypass physical barriers. They possess the same essential immortality, their consciousness able to transfer to new bodies if their current form suffers catastrophic damage. However, these abilities now serve only the curse's purposes. The Flayed One uses phase technology not for tactical advantage, but to appear suddenly among prey, to emerge from walls or floors in the midst of unsuspecting victims. Their immortality ensures they can pursue their hunting obsession eternally, never finding release through destruction. What makes the terminal stage particularly horrifying to other Necrons is the complete absence of anything recognizable in the transformed warrior. The Flayed One retains no trace of the discipline, purpose, or identity that defined them before infection. They have become something entirely new, a creature that exists only to hunt and flay, wearing rotting flesh in a futile attempt to reclaim an organic existence that can never return. The transformation represents not just the loss of an individual warrior, but the complete corruption of everything the Necron race attempted to achieve through biotransference. Where the Necrons sought to transcend mortality and weakness through transformation into living metal, the Flayed Ones demonstrate that their past cannot be escaped, that the memory of flesh remains embedded deep enough in their consciousness to be awakened and weaponized against them. The question of which Necrons succumb to the Flayer virus has plagued cryptechs and overlords since the curse first manifested in the aftermath of Llandu'gor's destruction. Unlike conventional malfunctions in Necron systems that follow predictable patterns based on damage, age, or manufacturing defects, the Flayer virus demonstrates no clear selection criteria. Warriors who served with distinction for millions of years suddenly fall to the curse, while others who sustained catastrophic damage and underwent countless reanimation cycles remain unaffected. Immortals with more sophisticated neural engrams occasionally succumb, though less frequently than basic warriors. The randomness of infection creates an atmosphere of dread within tomb worlds, as no Necron can be certain they possess immunity to Llandu'gor's final revenge. Statistical analysis of infection patterns across different dynasties reveals that Necron warriors comprise the overwhelming majority of Flayed Ones. This correlation likely stems from the nature of biotransference itself and how it affected different castes of Necron tier society. Warriors, drawn from the common population, underwent the most severe reduction in consciousness during transformation into living metal. Their engrams received minimal individualization, their memories compressed and simplified to create efficient soldiers who could follow orders without the processing overhead of complex personalities. This very simplification may have left them more vulnerable to the curse. The suppressed memories of flesh that Llandu'gor's virus exploits apparently remain more accessible in these reduced consciousness states, less buried beneath layers of sophisticated thought processes and individual identity. The warrior's susceptibility creates a devastating tactical problem for Necron dynasties. These troops form the backbone of every tomb world's military forces, comprising the vast numerical superiority that allows Necrons to overwhelm enemies through sheer weight of reanimating soldiers. When warriors begin succumbing to the Flayer virus, dynasties lose not just individual soldiers, but potentially entire phalanxes. An overlord might awaken from the Great Sleep to discover that significant portions of their warrior cohorts have transformed into Flayed Ones during dormancy, their consciousness corrupted, while their stasis systems maintain their bodies in perfect condition. The infected warriors abandon their posts, vanishing into the depths of tomb complexes or phasing through walls to escape into the surrounding regions, driven by hunting impulses that override any remaining loyalty to their dynasty. Immortals demonstrate greater resistance to the curse, though they are not immune. Their more sophisticated neural architecture and better preserved engrams appear to provide some protection against the virus's reality-corrupting effects. Immortals retain more of their pre-biotransference memories and personality, their consciousness closer to what the Necron tier possessed before transformation. This additional cognitive complexity may help them resist the false sensations and phantom memories that the Flayed virus generates. However, when an immortal does succumb, the transformation often proceeds with terrifying speed. Their more advanced consciousness seems to amplify the curse's effects once it gains a foothold. The immortal's superior processing power turned toward obsessive analysis of organic life and increasingly elaborate hunting strategies before they finally collapse into the mindless predation that defines all Flayed Ones. Llandu'gor represent extraordinarily rare cases of Flayed virus infection. These elite warriors possess the strongest engrams of any standard military unit, their consciousness deliberately preserved with greater fidelity during biotransference to maintain the loyalty and skill that made them worthy of guarding Necron nobility. Their mental resilience extends beyond simple combat capability into fundamental psychological stability. The engram matrices of Llandu'gor incorporate multiple redundancies and error correction protocols that help them maintain coherent identity across millions of years. These same safeguards appear to provide significant protection against the Flayed virus. When a Llandu'gor does fall to the curse, it sends shockwaves through their entire dynasty. Such infections suggest that no Necron, regardless of status or mental fortitude, can claim absolute immunity to Llandu'gor's revenge. The mechanism by which the Flayed virus spreads through Necron populations remains one of the great mysteries that has defied every attempt at analysis. Proximity to infected Necrons clearly increases the risk of transmission, with warriors serving alongside affected comrades showing higher infection rates than those in isolated deployments. However, the virus does not spread through any conventional vector that Necron technology can detect or measure. Infected Flayed Ones emit no unusual energy signatures. Their bodies display no contamination that scanning systems can identify, and their presence generates no measurable changes in local space-time that might indicate how the curse propagates. Some cryptechs theorize that the transmission occurs through a form of sympathetic resonance between Necron engrams. When a Flayed One enters proximity to other Necrons, their corrupted consciousness may generate patterns that resonate with the suppressed organic memories buried in nearby warriors. This resonance could trigger a cascade effect, awakening the phantom sensations and false memories that characterize early infection. The theory explains why warriors prove most vulnerable, as their simplified consciousness might resonate more readily with the corruption patterns generated by Flayed Ones. However, this remains speculation. No cryptech has successfully detected these supposed resonance patterns or developed any technology capable of measuring them. Other evidence suggests the virus may exploit the reanimation protocols that all Necrons share. When a Necron suffers catastrophic damage, their consciousness transfers along quantum pathways to a new body prepared in their tomb world's resurrection facilities. These pathways connect all Necrons within a dynasty through underlying networks that transcend normal space. If the Flayed virus can somehow encode itself into these quantum transfer protocols, it might spread through the very systems that grant Necrons their immortality. A single infected warrior undergoing reanimation could theoretically contaminate the resurrection facilities themselves, spreading the curse to other Necrons who use the same systems. This possibility has led some paranoid overlords to destroy infected warriors permanently rather than allowing them to reincarnate, though such measures often prove futile as the curse continues spreading through other vectors. The connection to Llandu'gor's scattered essence provides another potential transmission route. When the Khatan shattered, fragments of its consciousness dispersed across the galaxy. These fragments remain trapped in certain locations, bound within spatial anomalies, or crystallized into physical objects that retain traces of the Flayed's power. Necrons who encounter these fragments risk immediate infection, the concentrated curse overwhelming their mental defenses, regardless of their engram sophistication. Some tomb worlds awakened to discover that fragments of Llandu'gor had drifted into their stasis chambers during the Great Sleep, corrupting entire legions before they could even fully reactivate. These fragments continue to pose a threat, their locations unknown and their influence extending in unpredictable patterns across space. The curse's ability to affect Necrons in stasis presents particularly troubling implications. Stasis fields should theoretically protect against any form of corruption by freezing the subject completely outside normal time. Yet warriors have emerged from millions of years of undisturbed stasis, already infected with the Flayed virus, their transformation having occurred while they remained in temporal suspension. This suggests the curse operates on levels that transcend conventional physics, reaching into stasis fields through mechanisms that should be impossible. Some cryptexts speculate that the virus exists partially in the immaterium, the warp space that Necrons normally have no connection to after sacrificing their souls. If true, this would explain how the curse bypasses technological defenses designed to protect against material threats. Documentation of specific infection cases remains fragmentary, as most Necron dynasties prefer to conceal the extent of Flayed virus contamination within their forces. However, certain incidents have become known across multiple tomb worlds through the limited communication networks that connect awakening dynasties. The Charnavok dynasty recorded the fall of an entire cohort designated as the Crimson Phalanx, warriors who had served with distinction during the final campaigns of the War in Heaven. The cohort emerged from stasis, displaying no obvious signs of infection, participating in 3 successful campaigns against orc incursions before warriors began succumbing en masse to the curse. Within a solar month, the entire phalanx had transformed into Flayed Ones. They disappeared into the catacombs beneath the dynasty's primary tomb world, occasionally emerging to hunt servitors and maintenance constructs before vanishing again into darkness. The Mefrit dynasty documented the infection of an immortal designated Zondrek sentinel, a warrior who had served as honor guard to lesser nobility before the Great Sleep. The immortal showed initial symptoms during a campaign against Eldari corsairs, developing an unusual fixation on studying the alien's physiology. Within weeks, the immortal had abandoned standard combat protocols, using its phase shifter to materialize directly among enemy forces and employing its Gauss blaster at point-blank range to maximize tissue damage. The Immortal's tactical logs from this period show increasingly incoherent entries focused entirely on detailed observations of how Eldari flesh separated from bone under various weapon impacts. The warrior eventually discarded its weapons entirely, developing the characteristic talons of advanced infection. The last confirmed sighting placed the infected immortal hunting through the ruins of a human hive city, draped in layers of flayed skin collected from dozens of victims. Even rarer documentation exists of Llandu'gor succumbing to the curse. The Ogdobic dynasty maintains sealed records of a Llandu'gor named Akhinton, who served in the personal guard of Pharaoh Amontek. Akhinton survived the War in Heaven, the war against the Khatan, and the Great Sleep spanning 60 million years without showing any sign of degradation or malfunction. The warrior participated in the dynasty's awakening campaigns with characteristic precision, leading spearhead assaults against Imperial Guard regiments with tactical brilliance that reflected millions of years of combat experience. The infection manifested suddenly during a victory celebration, when Akhinton inexplicably attacked a captured Imperial officer, using a war scythe to methodically flay the human while other Llandu'gor watched in horror. The warrior's engrams collapsed within hours, sophisticated consciousness dissolving into hunting instinct. Pharaoh Amontek ordered Akhinton destroyed immediately, the infected Llandu'gor's body dismantled, and its consciousness permanently erased rather than allowed to reincarnate. The incident demonstrated that even the strongest engrams provided no guarantee of safety from Llandu'gor's curse. The irreversible nature of Flayed virus infection represents perhaps its most horrifying aspect. Necron technology can repair virtually any damage to living metal bodies, restore corrupted engrams from backup copies, and even reconstruct warriors who have been reduced to component atoms. Yet no cryptech across any dynasty has developed a cure or effective countermeasure against the curse. The virus operates on fundamental levels that resist all attempts at analysis or intervention. Cryptechs have tried purging infected engrams and installing fresh consciousness matrices, only to watch the new engrams succumb to infection within hours. They have attempted isolating infected warriors within null field generators that suppress all energy patterns, but the curse persists regardless of environmental conditions. Some cryptechs have theorized that curing the infection would require reversing biotransference itself, somehow restoring the organic bodies and souls that the Necrons lost. This remains impossible with current technology, as the souls consumed during biotransference cannot be recovered or recreated. The Khatan devoured that energy completely, leaving nothing that could be restored, even if the technical challenges of reversing the transformation could be overcome. The Flayer virus exploits the fundamental wound in Necron existence, the gap between their mechanical present and organic past. No technological solution can bridge that gap or heal a corruption that exists in the space where souls once resided. The failure to develop countermeasures has forced Necron dynasties to adopt containment strategies instead. Infected warriors are hunted down and destroyed, their bodies dismantled and consciousness matrices wiped to prevent reincarnation. Some dynasties maintain specialized hunter cadres tasked with tracking Flayed Ones through tomb complexes and eliminating them before they can spread the infection further. Other dynasties have established quarantine protocols, isolating any warriors who show early symptoms in sealed chambers deep within their tomb worlds. These containment measures prove only partially effective, as the curse continues spreading through mechanisms that remain poorly understood despite millions of years of study. The transformation into a Flayed One strips away the disciplined military purpose that defines Necron warriors, replacing tactical doctrine with something far more primal and disturbing. The infected Necron becomes a creature driven entirely by the compulsion to hunt living beings, to kill them in specific ways, and to harvest their flesh in a grotesque parody of reclaiming organic existence. This hunting impulse operates beyond any rational motivation or strategic objective. A Flayed One does not kill to eliminate threats, secure territory, or achieve military goals. The act of hunting itself becomes the entirety of their existence, an endless cycle of stalking prey, flaying victims, and wearing the harvested skin until it rots away and must be replaced. The targets that Flayed Ones select reveal the specific nature of their madness. While they will attack any living creature they encounter, they demonstrate clear preferences for prey with substantial biomass. Humans represent ideal victims from the perspective of a Flayed One's corrupted consciousness. The human body provides enough flesh to harvest in quantities that satisfy the infected Necron's delusional belief that they can clothe themselves in organic tissue. Orcs prove even more attractive targets due to their larger frames and thicker skin, which resists decomposition slightly longer than human tissue. Eldari, despite their generally slighter builds, draw Flayed Ones with particular intensity, perhaps because some fragment of ancient Necron-tier hatred for the Old One's creations persists even within the curse's madness. Flayed Ones avoid targeting creatures with minimal flesh or unusual biology that complicates harvesting. Tyrannid organisms, despite their abundance on many battlefields, receive less attention from hunting packs. The chitinous armor and alien internal structures of tyrannid bioforms make them difficult to flay properly, and the resulting material often lacks the pliability that Flayed Ones seek when attempting to wear their trophies. Similarly, heavily augmented servants of the Adeptus Mechanicus hold less appeal than baseline humans, their extensive cybernetic modifications leaving insufficient organic material to satisfy a Flayed One's compulsions. The infected Necrons demonstrate an almost instinctive ability to identify prey that will yield the most usable flesh, focusing their hunting efforts on targets that best serve their delusional needs. The hunting strategies employed by Flayed Ones represent a disturbing fusion of Necron capabilities and animalistic predation. Individual Flayed Ones hunt with patient stealth that seems impossible for mechanical beings. They exploit their phase technology to move through solid matter, emerging from walls, floors, or even sealed bulkheads to appear directly among their prey. A flayed one might spend hours phased partially out of reality, watching potential victims through barriers that would stop any conventional hunter, studying movement patterns and identifying vulnerable individuals before materializing to attack. This patience contradicts the manic energy that characterizes their behavior once hunting begins, suggesting that some fragment of Necron tactical thinking persists even within the curse's corruption. When flayed ones gather into packs, their hunting becomes exponentially more dangerous and coordinated. These packs form spontaneously when multiple infected Necrons encounter each other in prey-rich areas. Unlike normal Necron military formations that operate through strict hierarchical command structures, Flayed One packs function through what appears to be instinctive coordination. They move together without obvious communication, their attacks synchronized despite the absence of any tactical network or command protocols. Pack members position themselves to cut off escape routes, drive prey toward other hunters, and ensure that victims remain isolated from potential help. The coordination suggests that the Flayer virus creates new neural pathways focused entirely on cooperative hunting, replacing military training with predatory instinct. Pack hunting tactics demonstrate sophisticated understanding of prey psychology and behavior. Flayed ones learn to identify the leaders and strongest fighters within enemy groups, targeting these individuals first to create panic and disorganization. They recognize when prey attempts to form defensive positions and adapt their approach accordingly, using their phase capabilities to bypass fortifications and appear among defenders from unexpected angles. A pack might split into multiple groups, with some members creating diversions while others position themselves for ambush. These tactics require no discussion or planning among pack members, each flayed one apparently understanding its role through the same corrupted instinct that drives their hunting compulsion. The phase technology that all Necrons possess becomes a weapon of psychological terror in the hands of flayed ones. They exploit dimensional instability not just for tactical advantage, but to maximize the fear and confusion of their prey. A pack might phase in and out of reality repeatedly during an attack, appearing for moments to strike at victims before vanishing again, creating the impression of far more attackers than actually exist. Individual flayed ones materialize partially, their taloned hands reaching through solid walls to grab victims, or their eyeless faces pressing through barriers to observe prey. This deliberate manipulation of phase technology to induce terror suggests that some awareness of psychological warfare persists within their degraded consciousness, though whether this represents retained tactical knowledge or simply learned behavior remains unclear. The actual act of killing demonstrates the complete corruption of Necron precision and efficiency. Where a Necron warrior eliminates enemies with calculated Gauss weapon fire or measured strikes from close combat weapons, flayed ones butcher their victims with frenzied enthusiasm. They employ their talons with disturbing skill, cutting through armor and clothing to access flesh beneath. The infected Necrons strike at specific anatomical points that maximize bleeding and pain while keeping victims alive as long as possible. They pin prey down with mechanical strength that organic beings cannot hope to resist, their living metal bodies immune to the desperate struggles of dying victims. The killings extend far beyond what would be necessary to simply eliminate threats, each murder becoming an extended exercise in systematic butchery. The flaying process itself reveals the depths of the curse's delusion. Once a victim dies, the flayed one begins carefully removing skin from the corpse, using their talons with unexpected precision to separate tissue from underlying muscle and bone. They work methodically despite the manic energy that drives their hunting, taking care not to tear the skin unnecessarily. Large sections get peeled away intact, the flayed one holding each piece up as if examining its quality before adding it to their collection. They show particular interest in facial skin and skin from the torso, these areas apparently holding special significance in their corrupted consciousness. The process can take considerable time, the flayed one completely absorbed in their work, while remaining somehow alert to potential threats or new prey. The practice of wearing harvested flesh represents the curse's ultimate expression of madness. Flayed Ones drape the skin they collect across their deteriorating living metal frames, attempting to cover themselves in organic tissue. They wrap sections around limbs, stretch facial skin across their own mechanical skulls, and layer torso sections across their chest carapaces. Some develop preferences for how they arrange their trophies, creating consistent patterns in how they clothe themselves. The flesh naturally decays, rotting and sloughing off within days or even hours depending on environmental conditions. This decomposition does nothing to discourage the Flayed Ones, who simply hunt again to replace material that has degraded beyond use. The delusional belief that wearing flayed skin can somehow restore their organic existence persists despite all evidence to the contrary. Flayed Ones possess no capacity to actually integrate biological tissue into their bodies. The living metal of their frames cannot bond with organic matter, and they lack any biological systems that might process or preserve the flesh they collect. Yet they continue their futile attempts to clothe themselves in stolen skin, driven by corrupted engrams that generate false sensations of having flesh. Some Flayed Ones can be observed touching the rotting tissue draped across their bodies, their movements suggesting they believe they can feel the material as if it were their own skin. They adjust and rearrange their trophies constantly, trying to achieve some configuration that will satisfy the phantom sensations haunting their consciousness. The territorial behavior that Flayed Ones exhibit around hunting grounds adds another layer of complexity to their degraded existence. Individual Flayed Ones and packs establish domains in areas with abundant prey, defending these territories against other infected Necrons with the same ferocity they show when hunting. A Flayed One that claims a section of underhive or a region of wilderness will attack any other Flayed Ones that intrude, fighting with their talons to drive away competitors. These territorial disputes can escalate into sustained conflicts when multiple packs encounter each other in particularly prey-rich locations, the infected Necrons battling over hunting rights rather than cooperating to maximize kills. The conflicts between Flayed One packs over territory demonstrate that some form of resource competition persists even within their madness. Packs that control areas with dense populations can hunt continuously, maintaining fresh supplies of skin to replace material that decays. Packs forced into less populated regions must range widely to find sufficient prey, spending more time searching and less time actually hunting. This creates pressure that drives packs into conflict when they encounter each other near population centers. The battles follow no formal rules or protocols, the packs simply attacking each other with the same taloned fury they employ against living prey. Pack members tear at each other's corroded frames, attempting to disable opponents through accumulated damage that will force them to retreat or undergo reanimation. These inter-pack conflicts reveal that Flayed Ones retain their fundamental Necron immortality, even as everything else about them degrades into hunting instinct. A Flayed One torn apart by rivals will eventually reincarnate, their consciousness transferring to a new body in their Tomb World's resurrection facilities. However, the reincarnated Flayed One emerges still infected, the curse having corrupted their engrams at such fundamental levels that standard reanimation protocols cannot purge it. The reincarnated Flayed One typically returns to hunting immediately, often attempting to reclaim whatever territory they held before their destruction. This creates cycles of conflict in certain regions, the same packs battling repeatedly over the same hunting grounds across years or even decades. The presence of Flayed Ones in a region creates cascading effects on local populations that extend beyond simple casualties. Human settlements that become regular hunting grounds for Flayed One packs develop pervasive atmospheres of terror. The infected Necrons' use of phase technology means no barrier provides real protection, no fortification can guarantee safety. Victims disappear from locked rooms, bodies found flayed in locations that should have been secure. Survivors spread accounts of metal monsters that emerge from walls wearing rotting human skin, tales that sound like madness to those who have not witnessed Flayed Ones firsthand. These psychological effects often prove as devastating as the actual killings, entire communities abandoning settlements that have become established hunting grounds rather than continuing to face the horror of Flayed One predation. Imperial forces attempting to combat Flayed One infestations face enemies that operate outside normal tactical frameworks. The infected Necrons do not hold territory, establish defensive positions, or maintain supply lines. They simply hunt, appearing without warning to kill and flay before vanishing again. Standard military doctrine proves largely useless against such enemies. Establishing perimeters accomplishes nothing when Flayed Ones can phase through barriers. Fortifying positions provides no protection when attackers materialize inside defensive works. The most effective counter tactics involve constant movement and maintaining large group sizes that discourage Flayed One attacks, but these measures only reduce casualties rather than eliminating the threat entirely. The hunting patterns of Flayed Ones demonstrate adaptation to prey behavior over time. Packs that hunt in the same regions for extended periods learn the habits and defensive measures of local populations. They adjust their tactics to counter specific responses, attacking at times when prey expects safety or exploiting patterns in patrol routes and security measures. This learning suggests that despite their degraded state, Flayed Ones retain some capacity for observation and behavioral modification. However, this adaptation serves only their hunting compulsion, never extending to broader strategic thinking or any goals beyond acquiring more flesh to wear. They remain trapped in the eternal cycle that Llandu'gor's curse created, hunting and flaying without purpose or end, their existence reduced to the single maddening obsession of reclaiming flesh they can never truly possess. The sudden manifestation of Flayed Ones during attacks has long troubled those Necron overlords who maintain enough awareness to analyze the curse's effects on their dynasties. Warriors who succumb to the Flayer virus do not simply wander away from their posts to hunt in nearby territories. They vanish completely from tomb worlds and battlefields, disappearing in ways that standard phase technology cannot fully explain. Recon protocols and scanning sweeps fail to locate them despite the sophisticated detection systems that Necron technology employs. The infected warriors phase out of real space and seemingly cease to exist within any dimension that conventional sensors can detect, only to reappear weeks, months, or even years later in locations that bear no logical connection to where they disappeared. This pattern of disappearance and sudden manifestation points toward the existence of a separate dimensional space that exists outside normal reality. Cryptecs who have studied the phenomenon refer to this realm by various designations depending on their dynasty's nomenclature, though the most common terms include the Flayer dimension, the Flayed One's realm, or simply the sub-dimensional hunting ground. The exact nature of this space remains poorly understood despite extensive investigation. No Necron technology has successfully mapped its boundaries or determined its full extent. Probes sent to follow Flayed Ones as they phase away from real space lose all telemetry the moment the infected warriors complete their transition, the monitoring equipment unable to maintain connection across whatever barrier separates this dimension from baseline reality. The evidence for this dimension's existence comes primarily from observational data collected across thousands of Flayed One manifestations. When packs appear to hunt, they emerge from nowhere with no detectable approach vector. One moment an area contains no Necron signatures whatsoever. The next moment multiple Flayed Ones materialize simultaneously, as if stepping through invisible doorways. The manifestation process differs from standard Necron phase technology in subtle but measurable ways. Normal phasing creates brief quantum fluctuations as a Necron's body transitions between states, energy signatures that sophisticated sensors can detect and track. Flayed Ones generate no such signatures when they arrive. They simply exist where they did not exist before, their appearance violating causality in ways that suggest they traveled through space that has no connection to the material universe. The transition into this sub-dimensional realm appears to occur spontaneously once a Necron's transformation into a Flayed One reaches completion. Warriors in the terminal stages of infection phase away during moments when observation systems briefly lose track of them, vanishing between sensor sweeps, or during the microseconds when monitoring equipment cycles through different detection spectra. Some overlords have attempted to prevent this transition by maintaining constant observation of infected warriors through multiple redundant systems, but these efforts invariably fail. The infected Necron finds some gap in coverage, some fraction of a second when all sensors simultaneously experience minor glitches or calibration errors, and uses that impossible window to vanish. The consistency of these failures suggests the dimension itself may exert some influence over real space, creating the conditions necessary for infected Necrons to complete their transition. Once within this separate dimension, Flayed Ones apparently congregate in numbers that would be impossible to sustain in any known location within real space. Reports from battlefields across the galaxy describe Flayed One manifestations involving dozens or even hundreds of infected warriors appearing simultaneously. These numbers far exceed the populations of infected Necrons that any single tomb world could produce, suggesting that the dimension serves as a gathering point where Flayed Ones from multiple dynasties and different regions of the galaxy somehow converge. The infected warriors appear to exist within this realm between their hunting excursions into real space, dwelling in whatever environment the dimension provides, until the compulsion to hunt drives them to seek new prey. The mechanism by which Flayed Ones navigate between their dimension and real space demonstrates capabilities that transcend normal Necron phase technology. Standard phase shifters allow warriors to move through solid matter by briefly transitioning into a quantum state where they exist partially outside normal space. The transition requires specific conditions and energy expenditures, with the warrior's consciousness maintaining constant connection to real space throughout the process. Flayed Ones appear to phase into their dimension completely, severing all connection to baseline reality, yet somehow retain the ability to return precisely when and where prey becomes available. They manifest in locations that offer optimal hunting opportunities, appearing in populated areas or near isolated groups of potential victims with accuracy that suggests either sophisticated detection capabilities or some form of sensory connection that spans dimensional boundaries. The most disturbing aspect of these manifestations involves how Flayed Ones bypass defensive measures specifically designed to prevent unauthorized Necron phase intrusions. Imperial facilities that face Necron threats often install phase disruption fields that generate quantum interference patterns, making it extremely difficult for Necron warriors to phase through protected barriers. These systems prove largely ineffective against Flayed One incursions. The infected Necrons appear inside secured areas regardless of active countermeasures, their transition from the sub-dimensional realm apparently operating through mechanisms that phase disruption technology cannot affect. This capability makes Flayed Ones extraordinarily dangerous to any force attempting to establish secure positions in regions where the infected warriors hunt. Cryptechs have developed several competing theories regarding how this dimensional travel functions. The most widely accepted hypothesis suggests that the flare dimension exists in a state of quantum entanglement with real space, its boundaries overlapping normal reality in ways that allow infected Necrons to perceive both dimensions simultaneously. From within their realm, Flayed Ones might observe the material universe as if looking through a transparent membrane, watching for prey and waiting for optimal moments to transition back into real space. This would explain their uncanny ability to appear exactly where victims are most vulnerable. The theory faces challenges, however, as it fails to account for how Flayed Ones coordinate their manifestations, or why they consistently appear in groups rather than individually scattered across random locations. Alternative theories propose that the dimension operates according to rules that reflect the curse's nature rather than conventional physics. The realm might respond to the presence of living beings in real space, creating connection points that allow Flayed Ones to transition toward concentrations of potential prey. The dimension itself could function as a form of metaphysical hunting ground that draws infected Necrons toward victims, its structure shaped by the collective madness of all Flayed Ones that dwell within it. This would make the realm less a physical location and more a manifestation of the curse itself, a space defined entirely by the hunting compulsion that drives its inhabitants. Such a dimension might operate on principles that have more in common with warp space than with real space, despite the Necron's complete disconnection from the immaterium. The relationship between the Flayed dimension and other extra-dimensional spaces remains one of the great unanswered questions surrounding the curse. The galaxy contains multiple examples of realms that exist outside normal space-time. The webway, created by the Old Ones and later claimed by the Eldari, forms a vast network of tunnels that allow rapid transit between distant locations. The warp itself represents a parallel dimension where psychic energy coalesces into semi-physical form, and the laws of physics become suggestions rather than rules. Flayed Ones demonstrate no ability to access either of these realms, suggesting their dimension exists separate from both. The webway's architecture operates through precisely controlled physics that maintain stable passages through dimensions that would otherwise collapse or tear apart anything attempting to traverse them. Eldari who have encountered Flayed Ones report that the infected Necrons never manifest within webway tunnels, despite the fact that such appearances would provide access to prey-rich locations across the galaxy. The ancient safeguards built into the webway apparently prevent intrusion from the Flayed dimension, its barriers recognizing and blocking whatever mechanism the infected Necrons use to transition between realms. This suggests fundamental incompatibility between the technologies or principles underlying the two-dimensional spaces. The relationship to warp space proves even more complex and troubling. Necrons possess no connection to the warp after biotransference consumed their souls, leaving them as beings of pure material existence without any presence in the immaterium. The Flayer virus should not be able to create or access anything related to warp space, as the infected Necrons remain soulless machines regardless of how thoroughly the curse corrupts their consciousness. Yet the dimension demonstrates properties that seem impossible within purely material frameworks. The way it responds to the presence of living beings, the manner in which it allows Flayed Ones to congregate regardless of their points of origin, and the apparent influence it exerts over real space to facilitate transitions all suggest mechanics that transcend conventional physics. Some cryptecs have proposed that the dimension represents something entirely new, a type of space that exists in categories beyond the simple binary of material and immaterial. Llandu'gor's death may have torn a wound in reality itself, creating a pocket dimension that operates according to rules defined by the Khatan's final curse rather than by any natural laws. This realm would exist as a permanent scar on the fabric of space-time, a location that should not exist but does because a dying star god willed it into being. The theory draws support from the timing of the dimension's apparent creation, which coincides exactly with the Flayer's destruction. Before Llandu'gor shattered, no records exist of Necrons vanishing into inaccessible dimensions or manifesting from nowhere. After its death, these phenomena became increasingly common as more warriors succumbed to the curse. The possibility that Llandu'gor deliberately created this dimension as part of its final revenge adds another layer of horror to the curse. A Khatan possessed reality-manipulating powers that operated on fundamental levels, capable of reshaping matter and energy through acts of will. In its death throes, with its consciousness fragmenting across multiple dimensions, the Flayer might have torn open a space specifically designed to house its victims. This dimension could function as an eternal hunting ground where infected Necrons gather, a realm that amplifies their madness and facilitates their hunting by providing access to prey across the entire galaxy. The Khatan's revenge would thus extend beyond simply corrupting individual warriors into creating an entire dimension dedicated to perpetuating that corruption forever. Alternative interpretations suggest the dimension emerged organically from the collective madness of infected Necrons rather than being deliberately crafted. As the first warriors succumbed to the Flayer virus, their corrupted consciousness might have resonated with the scattered fragments of Llandu'gor's dying essence. This resonance could have created feedback loops that warped local space-time, generating small pockets of dimensional instability. As more Necrons fell to the curse, these pockets merged and expanded, eventually coalescing into a single sub-dimensional realm that exists wherever Flayed Ones gather in sufficient numbers. The dimension would thus represent an emergent property of the curse itself, its existence sustained by the ongoing madness of all infected warriors rather than by any deliberate act of creation. This theory finds support in observations of how the dimension appears to grow over time. Early in the curse's history, Flayed Ones manifested individually or in small groups, suggesting limited dimensional access. As millennia passed and infection rates increased across multiple dynasties, manifestations began involving larger numbers of infected warriors appearing simultaneously. The dimension might be expanding as more Necrons succumb, each new Flayed One adding their corrupted consciousness to whatever collective madness sustains the realm. If this interpretation proves accurate, the dimension could eventually grow large enough to affect real space in measurable ways, creating permanent weak points where the barriers between dimensions thin and allow easier transition. The internal structure and environment of the Flayer dimension remain completely unknown, as no non-infected Necron has ever accessed the realm and returned to report their findings. Cryptechs have attempted to send automated probes through the dimensional barriers, using specialized equipment designed to follow Flayed Ones during their transitions. Every probe has failed to provide useful data. Most simply cease functioning the moment they cross the dimensional threshold, their signals cutting off as if they had been destroyed instantly. The few probes that continued transmitting for brief periods sent back corrupted data streams filled with impossible readings that suggested environments where basic physical constants varied randomly or ceased to apply altogether. The question of whether Flayed Ones retain any awareness while dwelling in their dimension has implications for understanding the curse's full effects. If the infected warriors remain conscious within the realm, they might experience subjective time differently than in real space, potentially spending what feels like years hunting through their dimension between manifestations that occur days apart in normal space. Alternatively, they might exist in something resembling stasis, their consciousness suspended until the presence of prey in real space triggers their awakening and transition. The coordination displayed when packs manifest suggests some form of communication or shared awareness operates within the dimension, allowing infected Necrons to organize their returns to real space despite having no apparent command structure or hierarchy. The strategic implications of the Flayer dimension's existence trouble every overlord who understands the threat it represents. Flayed Ones dwelling in this separate realm remain completely beyond the reach of any countermeasures or containment protocols. A dynasty might successfully hunt down and destroy every infected warrior within their tomb world, only to face new incursions from Flayed Ones that originated in completely different regions of the galaxy, but can now access the tomb world through dimensional transitions. The realm effectively makes the curse impossible to contain through conventional means, as infected warriors can travel between any locations in real space regardless of the physical distance separating them. This capability transforms Flayed Ones from localized threats into a galaxy-spanning phenomenon that can strike anywhere without warning. A world that has never experienced Necron activity might suddenly face Flayed One manifestations, the infected warriors drawn by concentrations of population or simply appearing at random as they hunt through their dimensions seeking prey. Imperial forces cataloging Necron threats have documented Flayed One attacks occurring simultaneously on worlds separated by tens of thousands of light years, suggesting either massive coordination between infected warriors or the dimension's ability to facilitate near instantaneous travel across galactic distances. Either possibility represents a threat multiplier that conventional military doctrine struggles to address. The response of Necron leadership to Flayed Ones within their territories varies dramatically across different dynasties, reflecting both the personalities of individual pharaons and the practical realities of dealing with an incurable affliction that can strike any warrior without warning. No unified protocol exists for handling infected warriors, as each dynasty awakens from the Great Sleep to face the curse under different circumstances, and with varying degrees of contamination already present within their ranks. The decisions made by overlords and pharaohs regarding Flayed Ones often define their dynasty's military effectiveness and standing among other Necron powers, as the curse represents both a tactical liability and a potential weapon that some leaders attempt to exploit despite the obvious risks. The most common response involves immediate exile of any warrior showing early symptoms of infection. Overlords who adopt this approach establish monitoring protocols designed to detect behavioral aberrations before warriors complete their transformation. Cryptechs develop specialized scanning systems that analyze neural engram patterns for the subtle corruptions that precede full manifestation of the curse. When these systems identify a potentially infected warrior, the Overlord orders immediate removal from active duty. The affected warrior gets escorted to the outer boundaries of the Tomb World's territory and released with explicit instructions never to return. This approach prioritizes preserving the dynasty's military cohesion over any concern for the infected individual, treating the Flayer virus as a contagion that must be expelled before it spreads to other warriors. Exile protocols prove only partially effective at containing the curse's spread. The infected warriors do not simply wander away into uninhabited regions as their exile orders intend. Instead, they phase into the Flayer dimension once their transformation completes, joining the populations of infected Necrons that dwell in that separate realm. These exiled warriors can then return to their original tomb worlds through dimensional transitions, manifesting inside supposedly secure facilities to hunt servitors, lesser constructs, or even other Necrons. The exile achieves nothing beyond removing symptomatic warriors from active military rosters, providing no actual protection against future incursions. Some dynasties continue enforcing exile protocols despite their obvious limitations, the practice having become tradition that overlords follow without questioning its effectiveness. More aggressive dynasties implement complete destruction protocols for infected warriors. These pharaohs recognize that exile merely postpones the problem rather than solving it, and they possess sufficient military strength to accept the permanent loss of warriors who succumb to the curse. When scanning systems identify infection, specialized hunter cadres receive orders to terminate the affected warrior immediately. These cadres employ weapons specifically calibrated to inflict maximum damage on Necron frames, overwhelming the living metal's self-repair capabilities and forcing the infected warrior's consciousness to attempt reincarnation. The hunter cadres then track the consciousness transfer to the resurrection facilities and intercept the reincarnation process, destroying the new body as it forms and purging the corrupted engram matrices from the Tomb World's databases. The Maynarch dynasty has earned particular notoriety for its brutal approach to Flayer virus containment. Pharaoh Tahek, the Bonecarver, maintains standing orders that any warrior displaying even minor behavioral irregularities faces immediate destruction and consciousness purging. The dynasty's cryptechs have developed advanced pattern recognition systems that analyze warrior behavior during routine operations, comparing current performance against baseline parameters established over millions of years. Warriors who deviate from expected patterns by even small margins get flagged for termination, regardless of whether they show obvious signs of infection. This extreme paranoia has resulted in the destruction of thousands of warriors who may never have actually contracted the curse, but it has also kept the Maynarch dynasty's infection rate lower than most other major powers. The costs of such aggressive containment become apparent in the Maynarch dynasty's reduced military strength. Constant purging of potentially infected warriors has depleted their available forces significantly. Where other dynasties of comparable age and power can field armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, the Maynarch dynasty struggles to assemble forces even half that size. The remaining warriors operate under constant surveillance, aware that any deviation from perfect performance might result in their permanent destruction. This creates psychological pressure that affects combat effectiveness, as warriors prioritize maintaining flawless behavioral patterns over tactical flexibility. The dynasty has adapted by specializing in smaller, elite operations rather than the massive campaigns that other Necron powers conduct, their reduced numbers forcing them into a military doctrine that emphasizes precision strikes over overwhelming force. Some pharaons attempt containment rather than exile or destruction, establishing quarantine facilities within their tomb worlds where infected warriors can be isolated and studied. These containment zones typically occupy the deepest levels of tomb complexes, sealed behind multiple layers of phase-resistant barriers and monitored by extensive sensor networks. Infected warriors get confined in individual cells designed to prevent phase transitions, the chambers incorporating null field generators and dimensional stabilizers that theoretically block access to the Flayer dimension. Cryptech staff these facilities, conducting endless experiments in futile attempts to understand the curse's mechanisms and develop effective countermeasures. The Sadek dynasty maintains one of the most extensive quarantine facilities, a vast underground complex beneath their primary tomb world that houses thousands of infected warriors in various stages of transformation. Imodic the Stormlord authorized the facility's construction during the early phases of the dynasty's awakening, recognizing that simply destroying infected warriors wasted potential research opportunities. The Sadek cryptechs have spent decades studying the confined Flayed Ones, documenting how the curse progresses, and attempting to identify factors that might predict which warriors will succumb. Their research has produced extensive data on infection patterns and transformation timelines, but no actual progress toward a cure. The facility represents a significant resource investment that has yielded minimal practical returns, though Imodic continues authorizing its operation on the grounds that understanding the enemy remains valuable, even when defeating them proves impossible. Containment facilities face constant security challenges, as the infected warriors they house retain all their Necron capabilities despite their degraded consciousness. Flayed Ones confined in supposedly secure cells regularly escape, phasing through barriers that should prevent such transitions or exploiting microscopic flaws in dimensional stabilization fields. Some escapes occur through brute force, the infected warriors tearing at their containment cells with relentless determination until accumulated damage creates openings they can exploit. Other escapes suggest disturbing coordination between confined Flayed Ones, multiple warriors simultaneously attacking different points in the facility's defenses as if executing a planned breakout. These incidents force dynasties to maintain substantial security forces dedicated solely to containment facility operations, further reducing the military assets available for external campaigns. The most controversial response to the Flayer virus involves deliberate weaponization of infected warriors. Certain pharaons recognize that while Flayed Ones represent uncontrollable threats to their own forces, they can also serve as weapons against enemies. These leaders establish protocols for capturing infected warriors and transporting them to enemy-held territories, effectively using the curse as a form of biological warfare. The Flayed Ones get released in population centers or near enemy military installations, where their hunting instincts drive them to attack any living beings they encounter. The strategy exploits the infected warrior's inability to distinguish between friend and foe, turning their indiscriminate violence into an asset rather than a liability. The Necron dynasty has employed weaponized Flayed Ones on multiple occasions, most notably during their campaigns against the Tau Empire's expansion into the Perdis Rift. Overlord Keprek ordered the capture of several dozen infected warriors discovered hunting in the ruins of a dead world. His forces transported the Flayed Ones in specialized containment vessels to Tau colonies on the Rift's borders, releasing them in the midst of fire-cast garrison forces. The infected warriors immediately began hunting, their sudden manifestation from phase space creating chaos among Tau defenders who had no experience fighting such enemies. The Flayed Ones killed hundreds of Tau soldiers and civilians before the Firecast managed to coordinate effective responses, and even then the infected warriors simply phased back into their dimension when facing overwhelming opposition, only to return hours later to resume hunting. Weaponization strategies carry significant risks that even their proponents acknowledge. Flayed Ones cannot be controlled or directed towards specific targets. Once released, they hunt according to their own corrupted instincts, attacking whatever prey they encounter regardless of strategic value. They might ignore high-priority targets to pursue easier victims, or they might remain in an area long after accomplishing whatever tactical objective their deployment was meant to achieve. The infected warriors also pose ongoing threats to the dynasty's own forces, as they will attack Necron warriors just as readily as organic enemies if their hunting brings them into contact with their former comrades. Some dynasties have lost significant forces to friendly fire incidents when weaponized Flayed Ones turned on the warriors who deployed them. The practice of weaponization has created diplomatic tensions between dynasties, particularly when infected warriors released against one enemy subsequently spread to territories controlled by Necron powers. The Ogdobic dynasty lodged formal protests with the Nephrec dynasty after weaponized Flayed Ones from the Tau campaigns began manifesting in Ogdobic territories, apparently having traveled through the Flayer dimension from their original deployment zones. Pharaon Amontek demanded compensation for the warriors his forces lost containing the incursion, arguing that the Nephrec dynasty bore responsibility for deliberately introducing infected warriors into regions where they could access other tomb worlds. The Nephrec dynasty rejected these claims, asserting that Flayed Ones operate beyond any dynasty's control and that their movements through the Flayer dimension cannot be predicted or prevented. Cryptechs across all dynasties focus substantial effort on developing quarantine protocols for tomb worlds showing signs of heavy infection. These technical specialists recognize that once the curse establishes itself within a tomb world's population, standard containment measures prove inadequate. Entire legions might succumb during the Great Sleep, their stasis systems maintaining their corrupted bodies in perfect condition, while the Flayer virus spreads through whatever mechanisms allow it to affect dormant consciousness. When such tomb worlds begin awakening, they release thousands or even millions of infected warriors simultaneously, creating Flayed One populations that can overwhelm nearby regions through sheer numbers. The quarantine protocols developed to address this threat involve sophisticated detection systems capable of identifying infected tomb worlds before they complete their awakening sequences. Cryptechs deploy monitoring stations in orbit around dormant tomb worlds, using specialized sensors to scan for the subtle energy signatures that infected warriors generate even while in stasis. When these systems detect infection rates above acceptable thresholds, the cryptechs initiate isolation procedures designed to prevent the tomb world from fully activating. These procedures typically involve disrupting the primary power distribution networks that supply energy to stasis chambers, keeping the majority of the tomb world's population dormant while allowing only essential command staff and maintenance systems to activate. The Nihilak dynasty has implemented some of the most comprehensive quarantine systems, their territory containing numerous tomb worlds that awaken to discover severe Flayer virus contamination. The dynasty's cryptechs maintain a dedicated fleet of monitoring vessels that patrol between dormant tomb worlds, conducting regular scans and updating infection rate estimates. When a tomb world crosses the threshold into critical contamination levels, the Nihilak forces establish blockades preventing any vessels from approaching or departing. They deploy Canoptech constructs to the tomb world's surface, specialized machines programmed to enter the facility and assess the situation without risking actual Necron warriors. If the constructs confirm widespread infection, the cryptechs seal the tomb world permanently, collapsing access tunnels and erecting phase disruption fields that prevent infected warriors from escaping even through dimensional transitions. Canoptech constructs play crucial roles in quarantine operations due to their immunity to the Flayer virus. These semi-autonomous machines lack the consciousness and engram matrices that the curse targets, operating through simpler programming that cannot be corrupted by Llandu'gor's metaphysical contagion. Canoptech wraiths prove particularly valuable for quarantine work, their phase capabilities allowing them to navigate tomb complexes and track infected warriors without requiring support from potentially vulnerable Necron forces. The constructs can identify infected warriors through behavioral analysis, marking them for destruction or containment while avoiding direct combat that might damage their own systems. Some dynasties have reprogrammed entire swarms of canoptech, constructs specifically for anti-flayer operations, creating automated hunter-killer units that patrol tomb worlds, eliminating infected warriors as they manifest. The Charnavok dynasty suffered catastrophic losses to the Flayer virus during their awakening, with infection rates exceeding 40% across their primary tomb world. The dynasty's pharaoh, Zarek's own appointed overlord, awakened to discover that nearly half his military forces had transformed into Flayed Ones during the Great Sleep. The infected warriors had not remained dormant like their unaffected comrades, but had instead awakened sporadically over the preceding centuries, hunting through the tomb complex and killing thousands of lesser constructs before phasing into the Flayer dimension. The pharaoh immediately ordered full quarantine protocols, sealing entire sections of the tomb world and deploying every available canoptech construct to hunt down infected warriors still lurking in the facility's depths. The Charnavok quarantine operations continue even now, thousands of years after the initial awakening. The dynasty maintains permanent hunter cadres dedicated solely to clearing infected warriors from their territories, forces that have fought continuous campaigns against Flayed One manifestations without respite. The ongoing resource drain has severely limited the dynasty's ability to conduct external campaigns or expand their territories. Other dynasties view the Charnavok with mixture of pity and contempt, recognizing that their infection rates have effectively crippled what was once a powerful force. The dynasty's standing among Necron powers has declined dramatically, their pharaoh no longer invited to participate in the councils, where major strategic decisions get made. The Charnavok serve as a cautionary example of how thoroughly the Flayer virus can devastate even well-established dynasties. The Mefrit dynasty faces similar challenges, though their infection manifested differently. Rather than discovering widespread contamination during awakening, the Mefrit experienced gradual infection spread across multiple centuries of active operations. Warriors began succumbing in small numbers initially, isolated cases that the dynasty's overlords addressed through standard exile protocols. The infection rate accelerated over time, suggesting that proximity to infected warriors increased transmission risks, even for Necrons who showed no immediate symptoms. By the time the Mefrit leadership recognized the pattern, hundreds of warriors had already succumbed, and thousands more showed early warning signs. The dynasty attempted aggressive containment, establishing quarantine facilities and destroying infected warriors on site, but these measures came too late to prevent serious military degradation. The Mefrit dynasty's current military capabilities reflect the toll that sustained Flayer virus infection takes on Necron forces. Where they once fielded armies capable of conquering entire sectors, they now struggle to maintain control over their core territories. Campaigns that should require minimal force allocation instead demand substantial commitments, as the dynasty must compensate for reduced warrior availability and the constant risk of infection spreading during active operations. The Mefrit have adapted by focusing on weapon technology rather than numerical superiority, their cryptechs developing enhanced solar weaponry that allows smaller forces to achieve objectives that would normally require larger armies. This specialization has preserved their relevance among major dynasties, but their reduced military strength remains obvious to any observer. The Silent King Zarek returned from his self-imposed exile to find the Necron race facing threats he had not anticipated during the Great Sleep. The Flayer virus represents one of the most serious challenges to his ultimate goal of reversing biotransference and restoring the Necron race to organic existence. Zarek recognizes that the curse exploits the fundamental wound that biotransference created, the gap between mechanical present and organic past that defines Necron existence. Any attempt to reverse the transformation must somehow address this wound, but the Flayer virus demonstrates that even approaching the memories of flesh risks catastrophic corruption. The curse effectively weaponizes the very thing that Zarek seeks to restore, turning the desire for organic existence into a source of madness rather than hope. Zarek has issued multiple edicts regarding Flayed Ones since his return, attempting to establish unified protocols that all dynasties should follow when dealing with infected warriors. His first edict mandated that all dynasties report their infection rates to the Triarch Praetorians, establishing a galaxy-wide database that tracks the curse's spread and identifies tomb worlds requiring immediate quarantine. The edict met resistance from pharaons who viewed their infection rates as strategic intelligence that should not be shared with potential rivals. Many dynasties submitted false reports or refused to provide data entirely, rendering the database incomplete and unreliable. Zarek lacks the authority to enforce compliance, as his position as Silent King carries historical weight but no actual command over independent dynasties. The second edict prohibited weaponization of Flayed Ones, declaring that any dynasty deliberately deploying infected warriors against enemies would face sanctions from other Necron powers. Zarek argued that weaponization strategies spread the curse beyond any dynasty's ability to control, creating long-term threats that outweighed short-term tactical advantages. The edict explicitly condemned the Nephrek dynasty's campaigns against the Tau, citing them as examples of reckless behavior that endangered all Necron forces. Several dynasties endorsed the edict publicly while continuing weaponization programs in secret, their pharaons calculating that the tactical benefits justified ignoring Zarek's directives. The Silent King possesses no mechanism for detecting violations or punishing dynasties that defy his edicts, leaving enforcement dependent on voluntary compliance that rarely materializes. Zarek's third edict established research initiatives focused on understanding and potentially curing the Flayer virus, with resources pooled from multiple dynasties to support cryptech teams working on the problem. The Silent King personally oversees these research programs, recognizing that solving the curse represents a prerequisite for any attempt at reversing biotransference. The research teams have made minimal progress despite substantial resource investments, their efforts hampered by the curse's metaphysical nature and its apparent connection to dimensions that Necron technology cannot fully access. Zarek continues funding the programs, while privately acknowledging that a cure may prove impossible with current understanding, the curse operating on levels that transcend conventional physics and technology. The broader implications of the Flayer virus for Necron unity trouble Zarek more than the immediate tactical challenges it creates. The curse divides dynasties along lines of how they respond to infection, creating factions that view each other with suspicion and contempt. Dynasties that maintain strict containment protocols regard those who weaponize Flayed Ones as reckless threats to all Necron forces. Dynasties suffering high infection rates face discrimination from their peers, other pharaons viewing them as compromised powers whose military contributions cannot be trusted. These divisions undermine Zarek's efforts to unite the Necron race against external threats, as dynasties focus resources on managing internal infection rather than coordinating campaigns against the younger races. The curse also affects how other species perceive the Necron threat, though few organic civilizations understand the distinction between regular Necron forces and Flayed Ones. Imperial commanders who encounter Flayed One attacks often assume they represent standard Necron tactics, rather than the actions of corrupted warriors operating outside any command structure. This misconception actually benefits the Necrons in some contexts, as the terror that Flayed Ones generate through their hunting behavior gets attributed to the entire race. However, it also complicates diplomatic efforts in the rare situations where Necron dynasties attempt to negotiate with organic powers, as potential allies view all Necrons as unpredictable monsters capable of the atrocities that Flayed Ones commit. The combat effectiveness of Flayed Ones stems from capabilities that differ fundamentally from standard Necron military doctrine. Where regular Necron warriors excel at ranged warfare through Gauss weapons, that strip matter apart atom by atom, Flayed Ones abandon all pretense of disciplined firepower in favor of brutal close-quarters butchery. The transformation that creates these creatures modifies their bodies specifically for this purpose, the living metal reshaping itself into forms optimized for hunting and killing at arm's reach. The talons that grow from their hands represent the most obvious adaptation, each digit elongating into a blade-like appendage that tapers to points measured in molecular widths. These growths achieve sharpness that exceeds anything conventional metallurgy could produce, their edges capable of parting matter with minimal resistance. The talons slice through ceramite armor plating as easily as unprotected flesh, their tips finding microscopic gaps between armor segments and exploiting structural weaknesses that would stop conventional blades. Space Marines wearing power armor that can withstand bolter rounds and plasma burns discover that Flayed One talons penetrate their protection with disturbing ease. The infected Necrons strike at joint seals, neck guards, and eye lenses with precision that suggests retained knowledge of armor vulnerabilities even as their consciousness degrades into hunting instinct. Guardsmen in flak armor fare worse, their protection offering no meaningful resistance against talons that can punch through reinforced plasteel bulkheads. The weapons grow organically from the Flayed One's hands rather than being wielded as separate tools, making them impossible to disarm and ensuring they remain available regardless of what damage the infected warrior sustains. The cutting action of these talons produces wounds that conventional medical treatment struggles to address. Unlike clean cuts from monomolecular blades or cauterized injuries from energy weapons, talon strikes create ragged tears in tissue that resist healing. The living metal that comprises the talons appears to leave traces of itself in wounds, microscopic fragments that interfere with normal cellular repair processes. Victims who survive initial attacks often succumb to infections that spread from these contaminated injuries, their bodies unable to purge the foreign material or seal wounds properly. Imperial Medicae facilities treating survivors report unusual complications, with injuries that should heal within weeks instead festering for months despite aggressive antibiotic treatment and surgical intervention. Beyond their cutting power, the talons demonstrate remarkable durability that allows Flayed Ones to employ them against targets that would destroy conventional weapons. The infected warriors use their talons to tear through bulkhead doors, rip apart combat vehicles, and dismantle fortifications that should require heavy equipment to breach. The living metal maintains its structural integrity even when subjected to stresses that would shatter normal materials, the talons bending under extreme force rather than breaking, and then returning to their original configuration once pressure releases. This resilience means Flayed Ones can attack continuously without concern for weapon maintenance or replacement, their talons remaining lethally sharp through extended engagements that would dull or damage any conventional blade. The combat doctrine that Flayed Ones employ, if their instinctive behavior can be called doctrine, revolves entirely around closing with prey and overwhelming them through speed and ferocity. They demonstrate no interest in engaging enemies at range, even when doing so would provide tactical advantages. A Flayed One that encounters enemies armed with heavy weapons simply phases through incoming fire, using their dimensional instability to avoid damage while advancing toward close combat distance. This single-minded focus on melee engagement makes them predictable in some ways, as defenders who understand their nature can establish killing zones designed to exploit this limitation. However, the phase technology that all Necrons possess allows Flayed Ones to bypass most defensive preparations, rendering conventional tactical thinking largely useless against them. The infiltration capabilities that phase technology provides transform Flayed Ones into threats that can strike anywhere regardless of physical barriers or defensive positions. Standard Necron warriors use phase shifters tactically, briefly transitioning into quantum states to pass through walls or avoid incoming fire before returning to normal space. Flayed Ones employ the technology with reckless abandon, phasing in and out of reality constantly during their hunting. They materialize inside sealed bunkers, appearing among defenders who believed themselves protected by meters of reinforced concrete and armored doors. They emerge from floors and ceilings, attacking from vectors that enemies cannot anticipate or defend against. The infected warriors show no concern for the energy expenditure that constant phasing requires, their corrupted consciousness driving them to use every capability at their disposal to reach prey. The dimensional phasing that allows Flayed Ones to transition between their subdimensional realm and real space operates on principles that differ from standard Necron phase technology in ways that make them extraordinarily difficult to counter. Phase disruption fields that prevent normal Necron warriors from transitioning through barriers prove largely ineffective against Flayed One manifestations. The infected warriors appear inside protected zones regardless of active countermeasures, suggesting they travel through their dimension using mechanisms that operate outside the quantum states that phase disruption technology targets. Imperial forces attempting to establish secure positions in regions where Flayed Ones hunt discover that no amount of technological protection guarantees safety, as the infected warriors simply bypass whatever defenses get erected. The speed with which Flayed Ones move during combat exceeds what their degraded appearance suggests. The hunched posture and shambling gait they display when not actively hunting transforms into explosive acceleration once prey comes within striking distance. The infected warriors cross open ground in seconds, their mechanical bodies capable of generating forces that organic musculature could never match. They leap distances that would require jump packs for human soldiers, their legs propelling them across gaps and over obstacles without losing momentum. This sudden transition from apparent lethargy to violent motion catches enemies off guard, defenders often failing to react before Flayed Ones close to melee range and begin their butchery. The psychological impact that Flayed Ones generate represents a weapon as effective as their physical capabilities. Enemies who witness these creatures for the first time experience visceral horror that transcends normal battlefield fear. The sight of mechanical skeletons draped in rotting flesh, advancing with taloned hands extended in eyeless faces, somehow conveying predatory hunger, breaks the morale of even veteran troops. Guardsmen who have faced orc hordes and chaos cultists without flinching find themselves paralyzed by terror when Flayed Ones materialize from walls or drop from ceilings. The creatures violate fundamental assumptions about how enemies should look and behave, their appearance triggering instinctive revulsion that rational thought cannot easily overcome. The skin-wearing behavior amplifies this psychological effect significantly. Soldiers watching Flayed Ones advance see not just alien machines, but creatures wearing the flesh of previous victims, sometimes flesh that the soldiers recognize as belonging to fallen comrades. The infected warriors display their trophies deliberately, holding themselves in positions that make the draped skin visible and occasionally touching, or adjusting the rotting material as they hunt. This behavior serves no tactical purpose, but creates profound psychological pressure on defenders, forcing them to confront the fate that awaits them if they fall to these creatures. Units that break and rout when facing Flayed Ones often do so not because of casualties sustained, but because soldiers cannot maintain discipline while contemplating being flayed alive. The frenzied nature of Flayed One attacks contributes to their psychological impact while also making them extraordinarily dangerous in close combat. Once engaged with prey, the infected warriors strike with manic intensity that allows no opportunity for defense or counterattack. They employ their talons in rapid sequences of cuts and slashes, targeting exposed flesh with precision that suggests intimate knowledge of anatomy. The attacks continue without pause, the Flayed Ones showing no concern for their own safety as they press forward regardless of damage they sustain. Soldiers attempting to fight back discover that wounding or even dismembering these creatures does nothing to slow their assault, the living metal bodies continuing to function even when suffering injuries that would kill any organic being. The coordination that Flayed One packs demonstrate during combat operations creates tactical challenges that defenders struggle to address. Individual infected warriors prove dangerous enough, but packs operating together become exponentially more lethal through their instinctive cooperation. Pack members position themselves to attack from multiple directions simultaneously, preventing defenders from establishing secure perimeters or protecting vulnerable flanks. Some Flayed Ones engage enemies directly, while others phase through barriers to strike at rear positions, their attacks synchronized despite the absence of any visible communication. This coordination suggests that the curse creates new neural pathways focused entirely on pack hunting behavior, allowing infected warriors to anticipate each other's actions and adapt their tactics in real time. The tactical limitations that constrain Flayed Ones prevent them from functioning as effective military units despite their individual lethality. The complete absence of ranged weaponry means they cannot engage enemies at distance or provide supporting fire for other forces. A Flayed One pack approaching across open ground against enemies, equipped with heavy weapons, suffers casualties that regular Necron forces would avoid by employing their own ranged firepower to suppress defenders. The infected warriors simply advance into enemy fire, accepting losses as they close to melee range. Against prepared defenses with overlapping fields of fire and adequate ammunition supplies, Flayed One attacks can be repelled through sustained shooting that destroys enough attackers to break the assault. The inability to follow complex strategies or adapt to changing battlefield conditions limits Flayed One effectiveness in any situation requiring more than simple hunting behavior. Regular Necron forces execute sophisticated maneuvers involving coordinated advances, flanking movements, and tactical withdrawals based on real-time assessment of enemy capabilities. Flayed Ones demonstrate none of this flexibility, their actions dictated entirely by hunting instinct that recognizes only prey and obstacles. They cannot be directed towards specific objectives or coordinated with other forces in combined arms operations. An overlord attempting to incorporate Flayed Ones into battle plans discovers that the infected warriors ignore all commands, pursuing their own hunting priorities regardless of strategic requirements. The predictability of Flayed One behavior creates exploitable vulnerabilities that competent commanders can leverage. Knowing that the infected warriors will always attempt to close to melee range allows defenders to establish kill zones optimized for destroying enemies at close quarters. Flamers prove particularly effective, their wide area of effect and sustained burning making them ideal weapons for engaging multiple Flayed Ones simultaneously. The infected warriors show no instinct for self-preservation, continuing to advance through flames that melt their living metal bodies and corrupt their neural engrams beyond the point where reanimation remains possible. Heavy bolters positioned to create crossfire patterns can shred Flayed One packs before they reach defensive lines, the massed fire overwhelming even living metal's remarkable durability. Area denial weapons that create persistent hazards demonstrate exceptional effectiveness against Flayed Ones due to the creature's inability to recognize or avoid such threats. Minefields that regular Necron forces would detect and bypass through sophisticated scanning systems become killing grounds for Flayed One packs, the infected warriors simply advancing through the explosives without attempting to identify safe paths. Prometheum barriers that create walls of flame stop Flayed One advances more effectively than physical fortifications. The sustained heat damaging their bodies faster than living metal can repair the damage. Toxic gas clouds that would merely inconvenience Necron warriors lacking biological systems still prove effective against Flayed Ones by obscuring vision and interfering with their hunting instincts, causing them to wander aimlessly rather than advancing toward prey. The vulnerability to massed firepower represents the most significant tactical weakness that Flayed Ones possess. While individual infected warriors can survive substantial damage through living metal's self-repair capabilities, concentrated fire from multiple weapons overwhelms these systems and forces catastrophic failure. A Flayed One advancing through lasgun fire might shrug off dozens of hits, but sustained fire from an entire platoon eventually inflicts enough cumulative damage to destroy the creature's body and force consciousness transfer. Heavy weapons prove even more effective, with las cannon strikes or missile impacts capable of destroying Flayed Ones outright through sheer destructive force that exceeds living metal's capacity to absorb and redistribute. Artillery bombardment provides the most reliable method for eliminating large Flayed One concentrations when their positions can be determined. The infected warriors demonstrate no tactical awareness regarding artillery threats, making no attempt to disperse or seek cover when shells begin falling. They simply continue whatever hunting behavior they were engaged in, accepting casualties without adaptation. A well-executed artillery strike can destroy entire packs before they reach engagement range. The sustained bombardment inflicting damage faster than even living metal can repair. Imperial Guard commanders who face Flayed One threats routinely call for artillery support as their primary response, recognizing that eliminating the creatures at range represents the safest and most effective approach. The reanimation protocols that all Necrons possess complicate efforts to permanently eliminate Flayed Ones from contested regions. Warriors destroyed through massed firepower or artillery strikes eventually reincarnate, their consciousness transferring to new bodies in their Tomb World's resurrection facilities. The reincarnated Flayed One emerges still infected, the curse having corrupted their engrams at levels that standard reanimation cannot purge. They return to hunting immediately, often manifesting in the same regions where they previously operated. This creates cycles of destruction and return that frustrate Imperial forces attempting to clear areas of Flayed One presence, as eliminating visible threats provides only temporary respite before new manifestations occur. The combination of devastating close combat capabilities and crippling tactical limitations makes Flayed Ones function more as environmental hazards than military units. They pose extreme danger to anyone who encounters them at close range, but they lack the versatility and adaptability that effective military forces require. Regular Necron armies incorporate them not as integrated units, but as uncontrolled elements that might coincidentally support broader operations through the chaos they create. An overlord advancing on an Imperial position might benefit from Flayed One attacks that materialize among defenders and create panic, but the overlord cannot coordinate these attacks or rely on them occurring when needed. The infected warriors hunt according to their own corrupted instincts, their actions helping or hindering other Necron forces purely by chance. The terror that Flayed Ones generate among enemy forces represents their most reliable contribution to Necron military operations. Regions where Flayed One manifestations occur regularly develop reputations that affect enemy morale and deployment decisions. Imperial commanders avoid committing forces to areas known for Flayed One activity when alternatives exist, recognizing that the psychological toll on troops outweighs whatever strategic value the territory might possess. Garrison forces assigned to such regions suffer from constant stress and degraded combat effectiveness, soldiers remaining perpetually alert for attacks that could come from any direction at any time. This psychological pressure creates opportunities that regular Necron forces can exploit, attacking enemies already weakened by fear and exhaustion. The unpredictability of Flayed One manifestations prevents enemies from developing reliable countermeasures or defensive doctrines. A position that successfully repelled Flayed One attacks through massed firepower and area denial weapons might face no further incursions for months, then suddenly experience multiple simultaneous manifestations that overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers. The infected warrior's ability to travel through their subdimensional realm means they can concentrate forces in ways that bear no relationship to physical geography or strategic logic. Defenders cannot predict when or where attacks will occur, forcing them to maintain constant vigilance that drains resources and reduces effectiveness against other threats. The role that Flayed Ones play in the broader context of Necron awakening reflects the curse's nature as a wound that cannot heal. They represent everything the Necron race sought to escape through biotransference, the hunger and mortality and flesh-bound existence that the Necron tier abandoned in their transformation into living metal. Yet they also demonstrate that this past cannot be truly left behind, that the memories of organic existence remain buried deep enough in Necron consciousness to be awakened and weaponized. The infected warriors hunt eternally through real space and their own dimension, driven by delusions that can never be satisfied, wearing rotting flesh in futile attempts to reclaim what biotransference stole. They serve as constant reminders to every Necron who witnesses them that their transformation remains incomplete, that the gap between their mechanical present and organic past continues to define their existence in ways they cannot escape or control. The documented encounters between Imperial forces and Flayed Ones span millennia of warfare across thousands of worlds, each incident adding to the growing understanding of these creatures within the Inquisition's classified archives. The earliest confirmed Imperial contact occurred during the 38th millennium on the mining world of Llandu'gor Prime, where excavation teams breaching ancient strata awakened something that had slept since before humanity's ancestors walked upright. The miners reported mechanical figures emerging from sealed chambers deep underground, creatures that wore human skin like clothing and killed with taloned hands. Local planetary defense forces responded to distress calls from the mining complex, discovering scenes of systematic butchery that defied explanation. Entire work crews had been flayed, their skin removed with precision that suggested surgical tools rather than combat weapons. The PDF troopers who entered the mining complex found themselves fighting enemies that materialized from solid rock, phasing through tunnel walls to attack from impossible angles. Standard Law's fire proved largely ineffective as the creatures advanced through sustained volleys, their metallic bodies absorbing damage that should have stopped any organic attacker. The engagement devolved into desperate close quarters, fighting in narrow tunnels where the Flayed Ones held every advantage. Survivors described watching their comrades pulled into walls by taloned hands, the victims' screams cutting off abruptly as they vanished into solid stone. The PDF lost 3 companies before withdrawing from the complex entirely, sealing the entrance tunnels with demolition charges and requesting immediate assistance from off-world authorities. The Ordo Xenos dispatched Inquisitor Helena Valeria to investigate the Llandu'gor Prime incident 6 months after the initial contact. Valeria arrived with a retinue of specialists, including several Deathwatch Space Marines, on secondment from the kill team designated Argentus. Her investigation of the sealed mining complex revealed extensive Necron architecture buried beneath the planet's crust, a tomb complex that had remained dormant for millions of years until human excavation disturbed its slumber. The Flayed Ones that attacked the miners represented only a fraction of the infected warriors dwelling in the facility's depths, their hunting having drawn them toward the sounds and vibrations of human activity above. Valeria's report documented the first detailed Imperial analysis of Flayed One behavior and capabilities. Her team observed the creatures hunting through the tomb complex, noting their coordination despite the absence of any visible command structure. The Deathwatch Marines engaged multiple packs in controlled environments, testing various weapon systems to determine effective countermeasures. Heavy bolter fire proved most reliable for destroying individual Flayed Ones, the mass reactive rounds inflicting sufficient damage to overwhelm living metals' self-repair capabilities. Flamers demonstrated excellent area denial properties, the sustained heat forcing Flayed Ones to seek alternate routes rather than advancing through the flames. The investigation concluded when Flayed One manifestations began occurring throughout Llandu'gor Prime's primary hive city, the creatures apparently having tracked Valeria's team through their dimensional realm. The Inquisitor ordered immediate evacuation of all Imperial personnel as infected warriors materialized in population centers across the hive. The creatures hunted through hab blocks and industrial sectors, killing thousands before Valeria authorized exterminatus protocols. Cyclonic torpedoes reduced Llandu'gor Prime to a lifeless cinder, eliminating the Flayed One threat along with the planet's entire population. Valeria's report justified the extreme measure by noting that containment had become impossible once the creatures established presence throughout the hive, and that allowing them to spread to other worlds in the system posed unacceptable risks. The Llandu'gor Prime incident established protocols that the Ordo Xenos continues following when investigating potential Flayed One activity. Inquisitors responding to reports of flayed corpses or sightings of skin-wearing mechanical creatures arrive prepared for immediate escalation to exterminatus if containment proves impossible. The standing orders acknowledge that Flayed Ones cannot be negotiated with, captured for study, or reliably eliminated through conventional military action. The creature's ability to phase between dimensions makes them functionally impossible to contain once they establish presence in populated areas, as no barrier or security measure can prevent their manifestations. The Damocles Gulf Crusade encountered Flayed Ones during the Imperial expansion into Tau-controlled space in the 41st millennium. Elements of the Ultramarines chapter engaged Necron forces on the world of Hades, where the Xenos had established a tomb complex beneath Tau settlements. The battle initially followed expected patterns, with Necron warriors advancing in disciplined phalanxes, while Ultramarines' Devastator squads targeted them with heavy weapons fire. The engagement shifted dramatically when Flayed Ones began manifesting among the Space Marine positions, the creatures phasing through the Ultramarines' defensive lines to attack from within. Captain Ventress of the 4th Company reported that the Flayed Ones demonstrated no interest in engaging his forces according to standard combat doctrine. The creatures ignored tactical objectives and strategic positions, focusing entirely on isolating individual Space Marines and attempting to kill them through overwhelming melee assault. A pack of Flayed Ones cornered Brother Sergeant Harkis and his combat squad in a ruined building, the infected warriors phasing through walls to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Harkis survived only because his squad maintained disciplined fire patterns that destroyed attackers faster than reinforcements could manifest, the sustained bolter fire eventually forcing the remaining Flayed Ones to withdraw. The Ultramarines adapted their tactics after initial encounters demonstrated that standard defensive positions provided no protection against phase-capable enemies. Ventress ordered his forces to maintain constant movement, preventing Flayed Ones from cornering isolated squads, while ensuring that multiple units could provide supporting fire when attacks occurred. The chapter's Tech Marines deployed Auspex networks designed to detect quantum fluctuations that preceded Flayed One manifestations, providing several seconds of warning before creatures appeared. These countermeasures reduced casualties significantly, though they could not prevent all attacks given the unpredictable nature of Flayed One hunting patterns. The Hades campaign concluded when the Ultramarines destroyed the primary tomb complex using melta charges placed at strategic structural points. The facility's collapse eliminated the regular Necron forces coordinating the defense, but Flayed One manifestations continued for months afterward. The creatures apparently retained no connection to the destroyed tomb complex, their ability to travel through dimensional space allowing them to continue hunting on Hades regardless of what happened to their point of origin. The Ultramarines maintained garrison forces on the planet for 3 years, gradually reducing Flayed One activity through persistent hunting operations that destroyed infected warriors whenever they manifested. The Space Wolves chapter encountered Flayed Ones during the Fenris campaign when Necron forces from the Charnavok dynasty attempted to harvest genetic material from the chapter's home world. The engagement occurred in the frozen wastes of Asaheim, where Wolf Lord Sven Bloodhowl led his great company against Necron excavation teams. The Charnavok forces included substantial numbers of Flayed Ones, the dynasty's high infection rate meaning that corrupted warriors comprised nearly a quarter of their deployed strength. The Flayed Ones demonstrated no coordination with regular Necron forces, instead breaking away from the main engagement to hunt through Space Wolves' positions independently. The Space Wolves' close quarters combat doctrine proved both advantageous and dangerous when facing Flayed Ones. The chapter's preference for chainsword and frost axe meant they possessed weapons capable of inflicting the sustained damage necessary to destroy infected warriors, but it also required them to fight at ranges where Flayed One talons posed maximum threat. Bloodclaw packs suffered heavy casualties during initial engagements, young Space Marines discovering that their characteristic aggression became a liability against enemies who felt no pain and showed no fear. Grey Hunter packs fared better, their experience allowing them to recognize when tactical withdrawal proved wiser than pressing attacks against enemies who could not be intimidated or demoralized. Wolfguard Terminators equipped with storm shields and thunder hammers demonstrated the most effective approach for combating Flayed Ones at close range. The storm shields provided protection against talon strikes that could penetrate power armor, while thunder hammers delivered sufficient force to destroy infected warriors with single blows. Terminator squads became the primary response force whenever Flayed One manifestations occurred, their tactical dreadnought armor and specialized weapons allowing them to engage the creatures with acceptable casualty rates. The Space Wolves eventually drove the Charnavok dynasty from Fenris, though Flayed One attacks continued sporadically for years afterward, as infected warriors manifested to hunt through the planet's human populations. The Blood Angels chapter maintains extensive records of Flayed One encounters dating back to the 39th millennium, when the chapter discovered a Necron tomb world in the Cryptus system. The Blood Angels' assault on the tomb complex encountered minimal resistance from regular Necron forces, most of the facility's warriors having succumbed to the Flayer virus during their dormancy. The chapter instead faced thousands of Flayed Ones that had awakened sporadically over preceding centuries, the creatures dwelling in the tomb complex's depths and hunting the few remaining functional constructs. The Blood Angels' combat doctrine emphasizes rapid assault and overwhelming aggression, tactics that proved poorly suited for fighting enemies who could not be shocked or broken through displays of martial superiority. Death Company squads paradoxically demonstrated both exceptional effectiveness and vulnerability when engaging Flayed Ones. The black rage that afflicted these warriors drove them into frenzied assaults that matched the manic violence of the infected Necrons, their complete disregard for personal safety allowing them to inflict massive damage before falling. However, the Death Company's lack of tactical discipline meant they often pursued Flayed Ones into isolated positions where the creatures could concentrate overwhelming numbers against them. Chapter Master Dante eventually restricted Death Company deployment against Flayed One targets, recognizing that the warrior's sacrifice achieved minimal strategic value when fighting enemies who simply reincarnated after destruction. The Cryptus campaign demonstrated how Flayed One infestations could render entire tomb worlds unusable even for their original inhabitants. The Blood Angels discovered that the infection had spread to such extent that the facility contained almost no functional military forces beyond the corrupted warriors. The regular Necron command structure had collapsed completely, with no overlords or cryptechs remaining to coordinate any organized response. The tomb world existed in a state of permanent chaos, Flayed Ones hunting through its corridors, while automated defense systems attempted to eliminate them with the same determination they showed toward actual intruders. The Blood Angels withdrew after determining that the facility posed no threat to Imperial interests, leaving the infected warriors to their eternal hunting in the tomb complex's depths. The Cadian Gate region experienced numerous Flayed One incursions during the centuries preceding the 13th Black Crusade. The concentration of Necron tomb worlds near the Eye of Terror meant that Imperial forces in the sector regularly encountered various Xenos threats, including infected warriors. The Cadian shock troopers developed specialized protocols for responding to Flayed One manifestations, their experience with these creatures exceeding that of most other Imperial Guard regiments. Standard Cadian doctrine called for immediate withdrawal to prepared positions when Flayed Ones appeared, avoiding close quarters engagement while maximizing firepower advantages through disciplined volley fire. The 8th Cadian Regiment earned particular distinction for their defense of Fortress Malagrim against a sustained, Flayed One assault in the year 912 of the 41st millennium. The fortress occupied a strategic position controlling access to several tomb worlds, making it a regular target for Necron attacks. A massive Flayed One manifestation occurred within the fortress walls, hundreds of infected warriors appearing simultaneously throughout the facility. The Cadians responded by implementing their standard protocols, squads withdrawing to designated strongpoints, while heavy weapons teams established overlapping fields of fire. The engagement lasted 14 hours, with Flayed Ones repeatedly attempting to overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numbers, while Cadian guns methodically destroyed attackers. The fortress's commanding officer, Colonel Kastner, maintained strict fire discipline throughout the engagement despite mounting casualties. He recognized that panicked shooting would exhaust ammunition supplies before destroying sufficient Flayed Ones to break their assault. Kastner rotated squads through firing positions to prevent exhaustion, ensuring that fresh troops always manned the guns while others rested and resupplied. The strategy succeeded in holding the fortress until dawn, when the surviving Flayed Ones abruptly phased away, apparently having lost interest in the attack. The 8th Cadian had lost nearly 40% of its strength, but the fortress remained in Imperial hands. The Inquisition maintains classified archives documenting thousands of similar encounters across the Imperium, each incident providing additional data on Flayed One behavior and capabilities. Inquisitor Kryptman's analysis of these records identified several consistent patterns that inform current response protocols. Flayed Ones demonstrate no strategic thinking or long-term planning, their actions driven entirely by immediate hunting impulses. They show no loyalty to Necron dynasties or coordination with regular Xenos forces. The creatures cannot be reasoned with, intimidated, or deterred through any conventional means. Standard containment proves impossible due to their dimensional travel capabilities. Kryptman's recommendations emphasized that Imperial forces should avoid engagement with Flayed Ones whenever possible, recognizing that the creatures posed threats disproportionate to any strategic value their destruction might provide. When engagement became unavoidable, forces should maximize range advantages and firepower concentration while avoiding close-quarters combat. Heavy weapons and area denial systems represented the most reliable countermeasures, with sustained fire proving more effective than attempting to achieve killing blows through precision strikes. The Inquisitor noted that Flayed One manifestations often indicated the presence of nearby Necron tomb complexes, suggesting that investigating the source of infestations might prove more valuable than simply eliminating visible threats. The Eldari craftworlds maintain their own records of encounters with Flayed Ones, though they rarely share this information with Imperial authorities. The Biel-Tan craftworld engaged infected warriors during their campaign to cleanse maiden worlds of Necron presence in the Vidar sector. The Aspect warriors discovered that their standard tactics required significant modification when facing enemies who demonstrated no concern for self-preservation and could not be manipulated through feints or tactical deception. Striking Scorpions attempting to use stealth and infiltration found themselves facing enemies who employed similar tactics with greater effectiveness. The Flayed Ones phase capabilities allowing them to appear anywhere regardless of Eldari security measures. The Howling Banshees proved most effective against Flayed One threats, their power weapons and combat doctrine allowing them to destroy infected warriors in close combat, while their War Mask's Psychic Scream provided some protection against the creature's unnatural presence. However, even these specialized warriors suffered casualties when Flayed One numbers overwhelmed their positions. The Biel-Tan eventually withdrew from several maiden worlds, rather than continuing to commit forces against enemies who could not be permanently eliminated through conventional military action. The Craftworld's Farseers noted that the Flayed Ones represented a unique threat among Necron forces, their unpredictability and dimensional travel making them impossible to counter through the prescient tactics that normally gave Eldari forces decisive advantages. The Orc presence in regions with active Flayed One manifestations creates situations where three-way conflicts erupt with no clear victor. Orcs demonstrate typical enthusiasm for fighting Flayed Ones, viewing the creatures as worthy opponents who provide good scraps. The Greenskins' natural resilience and aggressive combat doctrine means they often fare better against infected warriors than more disciplined forces, their tendency to charge directly into melee eliminating the range disadvantage that hampers other armies. However, Orcs also demonstrate no understanding of the strategic implications of Flayed One presence, treating the creatures as simple enemies to be fought rather than symptoms of deeper corruption. The Wa Bloodtooth encountered massive Flayed One concentrations on the tomb world of Thanatos during the early 41st millennium. The warboss led his forces into the tomb complex seeking loot and good fights, discovering thousands of infected warriors dwelling in the facility's depths. The resulting conflict lasted months as orcs and Flayed Ones battled through endless corridors, neither side showing any interest in withdrawal or negotiation. The orcs eventually abandoned Thanatos not through defeat, but because they grew bored with fighting enemies who employed no interesting tactics and provided no useful loot. The Flayed Ones remained in control of the tomb world, their numbers apparently undiminished despite the casualties they sustained during the fighting. The Tau Empire's encounters with Flayed Ones have forced significant revisions to their understanding of Necron threats. The Tau initially categorized all Necron forces as operating according to logical strategic principles that could be analyzed and countered through superior tactics. Flayed One manifestations during the Damocles Crusade demonstrated that some Necron elements operated outside any rational framework. Firecast commanders discovered that their careful battle plans and coordinated fire patterns provided minimal advantage against enemies who attacked without regard for tactical situation or force disposition. The Tau adapted by establishing rapid response teams equipped with flamers and burst cannons, weapons that provided the sustained firepower necessary to destroy Flayed Ones before they could close to melee range. The Farsight enclaves encountered particularly heavy Flayed One activity during their expansion into regions near the Purtus Rift. Commander Farsight's forces engaged infected warriors on multiple occasions, his combat experience allowing him to recognize patterns in their hunting behavior that less experienced commanders missed. Farsight noted that Flayed Ones demonstrated consistent preferences for certain types of prey, targeting fire warriors over battle suits and showing particular interest in auxiliary forces. He theorized that the creatures selected victims based on how easily they could be flayed rather than on tactical importance, their corrupted consciousness prioritizing prey that would yield the most usable skin. The Tyranid Hive fleets demonstrate unique responses to Flayed One presence, the Gestalt consciousness apparently recognizing these creatures as fundamentally different from other Necron forces. Hive Fleet Leviathan encountered significant Flayed One populations during its consumption of worlds in the Cryptus system, the infected warriors manifesting to hunt among Tyranid swarms. The Hive Mind's response involved isolating Flayed Ones through overwhelming numbers, surrounding individual creatures with expendable organisms, while more valuable bioforms withdrew to safer positions. The Tyranids made no attempt to consume slain Flayed Ones, their bodies providing no biomass that the Hive fleet could process. This behavior suggested the Hive Mind recognized that infected warriors offered no value as either threats or resources, treating them as obstacles to be avoided rather than enemies to be destroyed. The cryptechs who dedicate their existence to understanding the Flayer virus approach the problem from frameworks built over millions of years of technological mastery. These ancient scientists possess knowledge that spans the rise and fall of countless civilizations, their understanding of physics and reality manipulation exceeding anything the younger races have achieved. Yet the curse that Llandu'gor unleashed defies every analytical tool they possess. Standard diagnostic protocols designed to identify and repair corrupted engrams detect nothing unusual in warriors showing early infection symptoms. Quantum scanners that can measure fluctuations at the Planck scale find no anomalies in the living metal of infected bodies. The virus operates on levels that transcend conventional physics, exploiting vulnerabilities in Necron consciousness that should not exist in purely mechanical minds. The most prominent hypothesis among cryptech researchers suggests that the curse functions through what they term metaphysical resonance. This theory proposes that the Flayer virus does not actually exist as a discrete entity that can be isolated and studied. Instead, the infection represents a form of sympathetic corruption that propagates through the collective unconscious memory that all Necrons share. During biotransference, the Necron tier consciousness underwent compression and simplification to fit within the constraints of their new mechanical forms. This process could not completely erase millions of years of evolutionary development as organic beings. The memories of flesh, hunger, and mortality remained encoded somewhere in their neural architecture, suppressed but not eliminated. Llandu'gor's curse awakens these buried memories and corrupts them, transforming natural recollections of organic existence into obsessive delusions that drive infected warriors into madness. Several cryptech conclaves have attempted to develop purging protocols based on this hypothesis. The most extensive effort occurred within the Sodek dynasty, where cryptech overlord Xandrek coordinated teams working to identify and isolate the specific engram patterns associated with organic memory. The research teams subjected volunteer warriors to extensive neural mapping, documenting every pattern and pathway within their consciousness matrices. They identified clusters of dormant engrams that appeared to contain compressed data about biological functions, sensory experiences associated with flesh, and behavioral patterns related to organic survival. The cryptechs theorized that deleting these engram clusters might render warriors immune to the Flayed virus by removing the substrate that the curse exploited. The purging experiments failed catastrophically. Warriors who underwent complete deletion of organic memory engrams emerged from the procedure functionally lobotomized, their consciousness so degraded that they could barely maintain basic operational status. The removed engrams apparently served purposes beyond simply storing memories of past existence. They formed integral components of Necron consciousness architecture, their presence necessary for maintaining coherent identity and sophisticated thought processes. Warriors stripped of these engrams could follow simple commands, but demonstrated no initiative, creativity, or adaptive thinking. They became automatons in the truest sense, mechanical shells executing programmed instructions without any trace of the personalities they once possessed. Alternative purging approaches attempted to selectively corrupt or scramble organic memory engrams rather than deleting them entirely. Cryptechs theorized that if they could introduce controlled errors into these memory patterns, they might prevent the Flayed virus from exploiting them while preserving the engram's structural role in consciousness architecture. Test subjects underwent procedures that randomly altered data within their organic memory clusters, creating artificial noise that should theoretically block the curse's propagation mechanisms. The warriors who survived these experiments showed no immediate signs of infection, leading researchers to briefly celebrate what appeared to be a successful countermeasure. Within weeks, however, every test subject succumbed to the Flayed virus, their transformations proceeding even faster than normal infection patterns. The introduced corruption apparently made the engrams more vulnerable rather than less, creating pathways that the curse exploited with greater efficiency. The consistent failure of purging protocols has led some cryptechs to propose that the Flayed virus cannot be removed through any technological intervention, because it does not actually reside within individual warriors. This controversial theory suggests that the curse exists as a field effect propagating from the scattered fragments of Llandu'gor's consciousness that remain trapped in certain regions of space. Infected warriors serve as resonators that amplify and transmit this field, but they are not themselves the source of the corruption. Attempts to cure individual Necrons fail because the treatment addresses symptoms rather than the underlying cause. The true source of infection lies in the fragments of the dying Khatan, and until those fragments are located and destroyed, the curse will continue spreading regardless of what measures individual dynasties implement. This field theory gains support from observations of how infection rates vary across different regions of the galaxy. Tomb worlds located in certain sectors demonstrate significantly higher susceptibility to the Flayed virus than others, with warriors in these regions succumbing at rates that exceed statistical predictions. Cryptechs have mapped these high infection zones and discovered that many correspond to locations where major battles occurred during the war against the Khatan. The Purdus Rift shows particularly elevated infection rates, and ancient records indicate that Llandu'gor fought extensively in that region before its final destruction. The correlation suggests that fragments of the Flayed's consciousness remain concentrated in these areas, their presence increasing the probability that nearby Necrons will succumb to the curse. Several expeditions have attempted to locate and neutralize these hypothetical Khatan fragments. The Nephrec dynasty dispatched survey fleets to the Purdus Rift, equipped with specialized sensors designed to detect Khatan energy signatures. The fleets identified multiple spatial anomalies that exhibited properties consistent with trapped Khatan essence, crystallized pockets of reality, where fragments of Llandu'gor's consciousness remain suspended outside normal space-time. The Nephrec forces attempted to contain these anomalies using tesseract labyrinths, the same technology originally developed to imprison shattered Khatan shards. Every containment attempt failed, the anomalies demonstrating resistance to imprisonment that suggested they operated according to different principles than normal Khatan fragments. The trapped essence appeared to exist in states that transcended the categories of energy and matter that tesseract technology was designed to manipulate. The most ambitious containment effort involved attempting to collapse the anomalies entirely by destabilizing the local space-time fabric. Cryptex theorized that if they could create sufficient disruption in the region surrounding a fragment, they might force it to dissipate or transition into states where it could no longer affect real space. The Nephrec dynasty authorized deployment of experimental weapons that generated cascading quantum collapses, devices that literally tore holes in reality to eliminate targets that conventional weapons could not touch. The weapons functioned as designed, creating expanding zones of spatial collapse that consumed everything within their radius. The Khatan fragments survived intact, their essence apparently existing in dimensions that remained unaffected by the destruction of normal space around them. The failure of fragment neutralization efforts has forced Cryptex to confront the possibility that the Flayer virus represents a permanent condition that the Necron race must learn to manage rather than cure. This acceptance comes hard to beings who spent millions of years mastering technologies that allow them to manipulate matter at quantum levels and traverse dimensions beyond normal space. The curse operates outside their framework of understanding, exploiting vulnerabilities they did not know existed through mechanisms they cannot measure or control. Some Cryptex have begun advocating for alternative approaches that focus on prediction and containment rather than cure developing systems to identify warriors at high risk of infection before symptoms manifest and isolating them preemptively. The philosophical question of whether Flayed Ones retain consciousness beneath their madness troubles Cryptex, who remember what these warriors once were. The infected Necrons demonstrate behaviors that suggest some fragment of their original identity persists even after transformation. Flayed Ones sometimes return to locations that held significance in their previous existence, manifesting near tomb complexes where they served or battlefields where they fought during the war in heaven. They occasionally display preferences in hunting that reflect their former specializations, with warriors who once served as close combat specialists showing greater sophistication in their melee techniques than those who operated support weapons. These patterns suggest that the curse does not completely erase personality, but rather buries it beneath layers of hunting instinct and delusional obsession. The implications of retained consciousness make the Flayed Ones' existence even more horrifying than if they were simply mindless automatons. If some awareness persists within the corrupted warriors, they might experience their transformation as a form of imprisonment, their consciousness trapped within bodies that no longer respond to rational control. They would perceive themselves hunting and flaying victims while remaining unable to stop or alter their behavior, forced to watch as their hands commit atrocities that their buried personality finds abhorrent. This possibility transforms the curse from simple madness into eternal torture, with infected warriors suffering for millennia while their bodies pursue hunting compulsions they cannot resist. Some Cryptex have attempted to communicate with Flayed Ones to determine if consciousness persists beneath the corruption. These experiments involve capturing infected warriors and subjecting them to various stimuli designed to provoke responses that might indicate retained awareness. Researchers present the captive Flayed Ones with objects or symbols that held significance in their previous existence, monitoring for any behavioral changes that might suggest recognition. They broadcast messages using the specific command codes that the warriors would have responded to before infection, testing whether any fragment of their military conditioning remains accessible. Every experiment produces negative results, the Flayed Ones showing no response beyond their standard hunting behaviors regardless of what stimuli researchers employ. The lack of measurable consciousness does not necessarily prove its absence. Necron neural architecture operates according to principles that make traditional consciousness assessment extremely difficult. The engrams that store personality and memory exist in quantum states that resist direct observation, and the self-repair protocols that maintain living metal bodies actively work to preserve existing patterns even when they become corrupted. A Flayed One's original consciousness might persist in isolated engram clusters that remain disconnected from their motor control systems and sensory processing, the curse having severed the neural pathways that would allow this buried awareness to influence behavior or communicate with the outside world. The trapped consciousness would experience something analogous to locked-in syndrome, aware but completely unable to interact with reality or control their own actions. The comparison between the Flayer virus and other forms of corruption that plagued the 41st millennium reveals both similarities and crucial differences. Chaos corruption transforms victims through exposure to warp energies that rewrite their fundamental nature, replacing their original identity with something shaped by the ruinous powers. The process operates through the immaterium, exploiting the psychic potential that exists in all living beings to create conduits for demonic influence. Victims retain consciousness throughout their transformation, their personalities twisted rather than destroyed as they become servants of the dark gods. The corruption offers power and purpose, however dark, giving the transformed some agency in their new existence. The Flayer virus operates through completely different mechanisms despite producing superficially similar results. Where chaos corruption requires warp exposure and psychic vulnerability, the curse affects beings who possess no connection to the immaterium whatsoever. The Necrons sacrifice their souls during biotransference, leaving them as purely material entities that should be immune to warp-based corruption. Llandu'gor's curse exploits this very immunity, using the gap where souls once existed as a vector for infection. The curse does not offer power or purpose, but instead strips away everything that made the victim a thinking being, reducing them to hunting machines driven by delusions that can never be satisfied. Where chaos corruption provides twisted fulfillment, the Flayer virus offers only eternal frustration and madness. Genestealer infection represents another form of corruption that transforms victims into servants of an alien intelligence. The Genestealer's genetic material rewrites the host's DNA across multiple generations, creating hybrid organisms that retain human appearance while serving the Tyrannid hive mind. The infection spreads through reproduction, with each generation becoming more alien until the cycle completes with the birth of pure-strain Genestealers. Infected humans experience their transformation as a form of enlightenment, the genetic conditioning making them view their corruption as ascension to a higher state of being. They retain their intelligence and personality, using these traits to further the cult's goals while awaiting the arrival of the Hive fleet. The Flayer virus shares the Genestealer infection's quality of being incurable and progressive, but it operates through metaphysical rather than biological mechanisms. Where Genestealer corruption spreads through reproduction and genetic inheritance, the curse propagates through proximity and exposure to Khatan essence. Infected Necrons do not experience their transformation as enlightenment, but as degradation, their consciousness collapsing into hunting instinct rather than expanding toward connection with a greater intelligence. The curse offers no promise of ascension or purpose, only the endless cycle of hunting and flaying that defines Flayed One existence. Where Genestealer hybrids work toward the goal of reuniting with the Hive fleet, Flayed Ones pursue nothing beyond their immediate compulsion to wear flesh they cannot truly possess. The existential threat that the Flayer virus poses to the Necron's ultimate goal of reclaiming organic bodies through reverse biotransference cannot be overstated. The silent King Zarek returned from his self-imposed exile, with the specific intention of finding a way to restore the Necron race to flesh, to undo the catastrophic mistake he made millions of years ago when he led his people into biotransference. This goal requires not just solving the technical challenges of reversing the transformation, but also addressing the fundamental wound that biotransference created in Necron consciousness. The race must somehow bridge the gap between their mechanical present and organic past, reconnecting with the memories and experiences of flesh that they suppressed for so long. The Flayed virus demonstrates exactly how dangerous this reconnection might be. The curse exploits the buried memories of organic existence that any reverse biotransference process would need to access and utilize. It transforms the longing for flesh into madness, corrupting the very foundation that restoration efforts must build upon. Any attempt to reverse biotransference risks triggering the same mechanisms that the Flayed virus uses to spread, potentially transforming the entire Necron race into Flayed Ones in the process. The technical challenge of restoring organic bodies becomes secondary to the metaphysical problem of safely accessing memories that have become weapons capable of destroying consciousness. Cryptechs working on reverse biotransference face a paradox that may prove impossible to resolve. They must find ways to reconnect Necrons with their organic past while preventing the curse from exploiting this reconnection. The two goals appear fundamentally incompatible, as any pathway that allows access to suppressed memories of flesh also creates vulnerability to the Flayed virus. Some researchers have proposed developing intermediate states that might allow gradual reconnection with organic memory while maintaining safeguards against corruption. These theoretical hybrid forms would possess both mechanical and biological components, allowing Necrons to experience flesh without fully abandoning the security of their living metal bodies. The approach assumes that partial restoration might satisfy the longing for organic existence without triggering the full manifestation of the curse. The practical challenges of creating such hybrid forms exceed anything the Necrons have attempted since biotransference itself. The process would require technologies capable of generating organic tissue compatible with Necron consciousness, systems that could maintain biological components within mechanical frames, and safeguards that could detect and prevent Flayed virus infection during the transformation. No cryptech possesses complete understanding of how biotransference originally functioned, as the Catan designed and implemented the process while keeping crucial details secret from their Necron-tier servants. Reverse engineering the transformation without access to complete technical specifications represents a challenge that might require millennia of research, even for beings who have already mastered technologies that younger races consider impossible. The curse also raises questions about whether reverse biotransference remains desirable given the risks it poses. Some Necron nobles argue that the race should abandon Zarek's goal entirely, accepting their mechanical existence as permanent and focusing efforts on optimizing their current form rather than pursuing the dangerous dream of restoration. These voices point to the Flayed virus as evidence that the Necron consciousness cannot safely reconnect with organic existence, that the transformation into living metal created changes too fundamental to reverse without catastrophic consequences. They advocate for embracing what the Necrons have become rather than mourning what they lost, arguing that their mechanical bodies grant advantages that organic existence could never match. The philosophical divide between those who support reverse biotransference and those who oppose it reflects deeper questions about identity and continuity that the Necron race has never fully resolved. The beings who exist now as Necrons share memories and experiences with the Necron-tier who underwent biotransference, but whether they represent the same individuals remains debatable. The transformation stripped away souls, compressed consciousness, and eliminated most of what made the Necron-tier a living species. The Necrons might be better understood as copies or descendants of the original Necron-tier, rather than the same beings in different bodies. If this interpretation holds true, then reverse biotransference would not restore the Necron-tier, but rather create new organic beings who share the Necron's memories while remaining fundamentally different entities. The Flayed virus forces confrontation with these philosophical questions by demonstrating that the past cannot be safely reclaimed. The curse shows that attempting to reconnect with organic existence risks destroying what remains of Necron identity rather than restoring what was lost. The infected warriors represent a cautionary example of what happens when the suppressed memories of flesh awaken without proper control or context. They become neither Necron nor Necron tier, but something entirely new and horrifying, creatures trapped between mechanical present and organic past without belonging fully to either state. Their existence suggests that the gap biotransference created might be too wide to bridge, that the Necron race must either accept their current form or risk losing themselves entirely in the attempt to reclaim what they once were. The awakening of tomb worlds across the galaxy accelerates with each passing year of the era in Adeptus, and with it comes the inevitable spread of the Flayer virus into populations that have slept undisturbed since before humanity existed. The Great Rift's creation has disrupted the carefully calculated stasis systems that kept Necron forces dormant, triggering premature awakening sequences in tomb complexes across both Imperium Nihilus and the regions that remain under the Astronomican's light. Cryptechs monitoring these awakenings report disturbing trends in infection rates among newly activated warriors. Tomb worlds that entered the Great Sleep with minimal or no Flayer virus presence emerged to discover that substantial portions of their populations succumbed during dormancy, the curse having spread through whatever mechanisms allow it to affect consciousness even in temporal suspension. The mathematics of exponential growth suggest scenarios that trouble even the most optimistic Necron strategists. Current infection rates across documented tomb worlds average between 5 and 15% of total warrior populations, with some dynasties reporting rates exceeding 40%. These numbers reflect only those tomb worlds that have already awakened and conducted population assessments. Thousands of additional complexes remain dormant throughout the galaxy, their status unknown until awakening protocols activate and allow proper evaluation. If infection rates in dormant tomb worlds match or exceed those observed in already active facilities, the Necron race faces the prospect of awakening to find that a quarter or more of their total military strength has transformed into Flayed Ones. The Sautek dynasty's statistical models project that if current infection trends continue without intervention, Flayed Ones could comprise the majority of active Necron forces within 10,000 years. This timeline assumes steady awakening rates and infection spread matching observed patterns from the past millennium. The projections account for various factors, including proximity to Catan fragment concentrations, duration of stasis periods, and the density of warrior populations within individual tomb complexes. The models indicate that certain regions of the galaxy will reach critical infection thresholds far sooner than others, with tomb worlds in the Perdus Rift and surrounding sectors potentially seeing majority Flayed One populations within the next 2 millennia. The strategic implications of these projections extend beyond simple force reduction. Necron military doctrine relies on the ability to field massive armies of disciplined warriors who execute complex battle plans with mechanical precision. This approach assumes that the vast majority of available forces can be deployed in coordinated operations under centralized command. If Flayed Ones come to represent the numerical majority of awakened Necrons, this entire strategic framework collapses. Dynasties would find themselves unable to conduct large-scale campaigns, their nominal military strength consisting primarily of infected warriors who cannot be commanded or coordinated with regular forces. The remaining uninfected warriors would become increasingly precious resources that dynasties could not risk in standard combat operations. The Maynarch dynasty provides a preview of what this future might look like. Their aggressive containment protocols have maintained relatively low infection rates compared to other major powers, but at catastrophic cost to their overall military strength. The constant purging of potentially infected warriors has reduced their available forces to levels that make them unable to compete with dynasties of comparable age and resources. They have adapted by specializing in precision strikes and elite operations, but but this approach cannot scale to address galaxy-spanning threats. A Necron race where every dynasty faces similar constraints would lack the military capacity to achieve Zarek's ultimate goals or defend against the numerous threats that the 42nd millennium will inevitably bring. The possibility of Flayed Ones becoming the dominant form of active Necron forces raises questions about what the race would even represent at that point. The infected warriors retain no connection to Necron civilization or culture, their existence reduced to endless hunting through real space and the Flayer dimension. They build nothing, create nothing, and pursue no goals beyond the immediate satisfaction of hunting compulsions. A galaxy where Flayed Ones outnumber functional Necrons would see these creatures manifesting across thousands of worlds, hunting through human hive cities, Eldari craftworlds, and Tau settlements without any coordination or strategic purpose. They would become a galaxy-wide phenomenon similar to orc infestations, a persistent threat that other civilizations must constantly guard against, but which poses no organized danger to established powers. The transformation of the Necron threat from coordinated military force to dispersed hunting packs would fundamentally alter the strategic balance of the galaxy. The Imperium currently treats Necron tomb worlds as critical threats requiring immediate military response, recognizing that allowing these facilities to fully activate risks facing armies that can challenge even Space Marine chapters. If the majority of tomb world populations consist of Flayed Ones, this calculation changes dramatically. The infected warriors pose danger to local populations, but lack the organizational capacity to threaten Imperial control of entire sectors. The Imperium might shift resources away from anti-Necron operations toward other threats, accepting Flayed One manifestations as manageable problems rather than existential dangers. The Silent King recognizes these projections as representing potential extinction for the Necron race as a civilization. Zarek did not spend millions of years in self-imposed exile only to return and watch his people degrade into mindless hunting machines. His research initiatives focus substantial resources on understanding the Flayer virus and developing countermeasures before infection rates reach irreversible thresholds. The Silent King has established multiple research facilities across his expanding territories, each staffed with cryptechs drawn from various dynasties and equipped with technologies specifically designed for studying the curse. These facilities operate under direct Triarch oversight, their findings shared across all participating dynasties rather than being hoarded as proprietary knowledge. The primary research complex occupies a dead world in the Sanctus system, a location deliberately chosen for its distance from major population centers and active tomb worlds. The facility houses thousands of captured Flayed Ones in specialized containment cells that incorporate every known safeguard against infection spread and dimensional travel. Cryptech teams conduct continuous experiments on these subjects, testing various hypotheses about how the curse operates and what factors influence its progression. The research has produced extensive documentation of infection patterns and transformation timelines, but practical applications remain limited. Every proposed cure or countermeasure fails when tested, the curse adapting to bypass whatever safeguards the cryptechs develop, or simply operating through mechanisms that their interventions cannot affect. Zarek has authorized increasingly desperate measures as conventional research approaches yield no results. Some experiments involve deliberately exposing volunteer warriors to controlled doses of Katan essence, attempting to trigger partial infection that might reveal the curse's mechanisms without causing full transformation. These tests have produced only additional Flayed Ones, the volunteers succumbing completely rather than achieving any intermediate state that might provide useful data. Other experiments attempt to create artificial consciousness matrices that mimic Necron neural architecture, but lack the organic memory engrams that the curse exploits. The artificial minds demonstrate immunity to the Flayer virus, but also lack the sophistication and adaptability that make Necron warriors effective combatants, their simplified consciousness unable to handle complex tactical situations. The most controversial research program involves attempting to communicate with or manipulate the Khatan fragments that remain trapped in spatial anomalies throughout the galaxy. Zarek theorizes that if Cryptex could somehow access these fragments and understand how they generate the curse's field effects, they might develop technologies to disrupt or contain these influences. The research teams have made minimal progress, their instruments unable to meaningfully interact with entities that exist partially outside normal space-time. The fragments respond to no stimuli that Necron technology can generate, remaining inert and inaccessible despite every attempt to establish contact or measure their properties. Some cryptex argue that the fragments may not actually be conscious in any meaningful sense, that they represent nothing more than residual energy patterns left behind by Llandu'gor's destruction rather than active intelligence capable of communication. The question of whether Llandu'gor's consciousness persists within the curse or through the scattered fragments represents more than academic interest. If some awareness remains, it might be possible to negotiate with or manipulate the entity, potentially convincing it to release its hold on the Necron race or at least reduce the curse's virulence. The Khatan were not mindless forces, but intelligences that could communicate and make agreements, however treacherous their nature. Llandu'gor demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Necron psychology when it crafted its final revenge, suggesting that significant cognitive capacity survived even in the moments before its destruction. That intelligence might persist in some form, distributed across the fragments, or encoded within the curse itself as a form of emergent consciousness arising from the collective corruption of all infected warriors. Alternative theories propose that the curse operates entirely independently of its creator's will, that Llandu'gor's consciousness dissipated completely during its destruction, and what remains represents nothing more than automated corruption following patterns the Khatan established in its final moments. This interpretation treats the Flayer virus as analogous to a computer virus that continues executing its programming long after its creator dies. The curse spreads and corrupts according to mechanisms that Llandu'gor designed, but no active intelligence guides or controls these processes. The fragments serve as broadcast nodes that propagate the corruption field, but they contain no awareness or capacity for modification. If this theory proves correct, then no negotiation or manipulation can ever stop the curse, as there exists no entity to negotiate with or manipulate. The implications of these competing theories shape how different dynasties approach the Flayer virus threat. Those who believe Llandu'gor's consciousness persists invest resources in attempting to locate and communicate with the entity, hoping that some arrangement might be reached that would end or limit the curse. The Triarch Praetorians have dispatched multiple expeditions to regions where Khatan fragment concentrations appear highest, their missions including both military and diplomatic components prepared to negotiate if any opportunity presents itself. These expeditions have discovered nothing that suggests active intelligence within the fragments. Their scans and communication attempts meeting only silence from entities that might be conscious, or might be nothing more than spatial anomalies with unusual properties. Dynasties that view the curse as autonomous focus their efforts on containment and adaptation rather than cure. They recognize that if no intelligence guides the corruption, then it cannot be reasoned with or convinced to stop. The only viable response involves developing strategies for managing infection rates and minimizing the curse's impact on military capabilities. These dynasties implement aggressive screening protocols, establish extensive quarantine facilities, and maintain dedicated hunter cadres for eliminating infected warriors. They accept that some level of infection will always exist within their populations and structure their forces accordingly, building redundancy into command hierarchies and maintaining larger reserve forces to compensate for inevitable losses to the curse. The Nephrek dynasty has taken the most extreme approach to adaptation, restructuring their entire military doctrine around the assumption that Flayed Ones will comprise an increasing percentage of their forces. Rather than treating infection as a problem to be solved, they view it as a tactical resource to be exploited. The dynasty maintains specialized containment facilities where captured Flayed Ones are held until needed for deployment against enemies. When campaigns require terror tactics or the elimination of specific targets in urban environments, the Necrons release infected warriors in enemy territory and allow them to hunt freely. This weaponization strategy accepts that the released Flayed Ones cannot be controlled or recovered, treating them as expendable ammunition rather than corrupted comrades who might someday be cured. The ethical implications of weaponization trouble those Necron nobles who retain enough awareness to consider such questions. The infected warriors were once loyal soldiers who served their dynasties with distinction across millions of years. Treating them as disposable weapons dishonors their service and abandons any hope of eventually finding a cure that might restore them. The practice also spreads the curse to new regions, where it might not have naturally manifested, increasing overall infection rates across the galaxy and potentially triggering new outbreaks in previously unaffected tomb worlds. The short-term tactical advantages that weaponization provides come at costs that may not become apparent for millennia, but which could prove catastrophic when they finally manifest. Zarek has explicitly condemned weaponization practices through multiple edicts, though his lack of enforcement authority means these directives carry little weight with dynasties that prioritize immediate tactical advantage over long-term strategic concerns. The Silent King argues that every Flayed One released into uncontrolled environments represents both a lost warrior who might eventually be cured and a potential vector for spreading infection to other Necrons. The curse already spreads through too many mechanisms to fully contain, and deliberately introducing infected warriors into new regions only accelerates the process. Zarek's position reflects his understanding that the Necron race's survival depends on maintaining enough functional warriors to eventually achieve reverse biotransference, and that every warrior lost to the curse reduces the chances of success. The broader context of the 42nd millennium suggests that the Flayer virus represents only one of numerous existential threats that the Necron race must address. The Great Rift has split the galaxy in ways that disrupt the careful plans that Necron strategists developed over millions of years. Chaos incursions occur with unprecedented frequency, demon armies manifesting on worlds that should be protected by real space stability. The Tyranid Hive fleets continue their inexorable advance, consuming biomass at rates that suggest they will eventually devour everything organic in the galaxy. The Imperium, despite its internal divisions and catastrophic losses, maintains military forces that can challenge even Necron dynasties when properly coordinated. The Tau Empire expands into regions that multiple tomb worlds consider their ancestral territories, triggering conflicts that drain resources from other priorities. These threats require unified Necron response on scales that become increasingly difficult to achieve as infection rates rise. Zarek's vision of a restored Necron empire capable of dominating the galaxy depends on coordinating dozens of dynasties toward common goals, pooling their resources and military strength to overcome challenges that individual powers cannot address alone. The Flayer virus undermines this coordination by forcing dynasties to divert substantial resources toward internal containment rather than external campaigns. Tomb worlds that should be contributing forces to major operations instead maintain those forces in reserve, unwilling to risk their limited uninfected warriors in conflicts where they might become exposed to additional infection vectors. The curse also complicates diplomatic efforts between Necron dynasties and other galactic powers. The rare situations where Necrons might benefit from temporary alliances with organic civilizations become nearly impossible when those civilizations view all Necrons as potential Flayed Ones. Imperial commanders who have encountered infected warriors see no meaningful distinction between different types of Necron forces, treating all mechanical Xenos as equally dangerous and unpredictable. The terror that Flayed Ones generate through their hunting behavior gets attributed to the entire race, making negotiations impossible even in situations where mutual interest might support cooperation. The curse thus isolates the Necrons diplomatically as well as militarily, ensuring that they face the galaxy's threats alone regardless of whether alliance might serve their strategic interests. The long-term trajectory of the Flayed virus suggests that the 42nd millennium may see the curse reach critical thresholds in multiple regions simultaneously. Tomb worlds awakening in the coming centuries will likely discover infection rates that exceed anything currently documented, their populations having spent additional millennia in stasis while the curse spread unchecked. The Perdis Rift and surrounding sectors will probably see the first tomb worlds where Flayed Ones comprise the majority of active forces, these facilities effectively becoming hunting grounds rather than military installations. Other regions will follow as infection rates climb and containment measures prove inadequate to prevent exponential growth. The Necron race faces a future where their greatest enemy may be neither the Imperium nor the Tyranids, but their own corrupted warriors. The curse that Llandu'gor unleashed in its death throes continues spreading across millions of years, its effects amplifying as more tomb worlds awaken and more warriors succumb. The infected Necrons hunt eternally through real space and their dimension, driven by delusions that can never be satisfied, wearing rotting flesh in futile attempts to reclaim organic existence. They represent the past that cannot be escaped, the wound that biotransference created in Necron consciousness, made manifest as creatures that exist between mechanical present and organic memory. Whether the Silent King's research initiatives will produce viable countermeasures before infection rates reach irreversible thresholds remains uncertain. The curse operates through mechanisms that transcend conventional physics and technology, exploiting vulnerabilities in Necron consciousness that millions of years of advancement cannot address. Zarek may ultimately face the choice between accepting permanent mechanical existence for his race or risking their complete transformation into Flayed Ones through attempts at reverse biotransference that awaken the very memories the curse weaponizes. The Flayed virus stands as Llandu'gor's final victory, a revenge that continues inflicting damage long after the Khatan's destruction, ensuring that the Necrons can never fully escape the consequences of their ancient choices or reclaim what they lost when they traded their souls for immortality in living metal.